15 years ago, the silence of their town was shredded. The peace was not merely interrupted, it was dismantled. Men in sharp, obsidian suits moved through the neighborhood like a localized contagion, tearing through floorboards and storage crates, turning every domestic space inside out. It was a chaotic, rowdy tide of violence that left no bowl unexamined, no corner of the town left in shadow. In the eye of that storm, a young Lee-yeon sat alone in the quiet house, her studies spread out before her. Her world was small, anchored by the absence of her guardians, until the tranquility was shattered by a sound that would haunt her for years, the desperate, splintering scrape of fingernails against wood. The voice on the other side of the threshold was a jagged blade of sound. It was the plea of a woman whose strength had long since withered, a woman begging not for entry, but for a sanctuary that didn't exist. Lee-yeon froze, her pencil rolling forgotten across the floor, as the weeping grew into a chorus of pure, primal terror. The town's gossip had been rife with talk of a woman being hunted, a target pursued by the men in suits. In that moment of suspended decision, Lee-yeon saw a reflection of her own isolation in the woman's panic. The instinct to bolt the door and hide was powerful, but the empathy of the damned won out. As she swung the door wide, she met the gaze of a creature undone, disheveled, her hands carved by thorns, eyes searching Lee-yeon's face for the last possible thread of survival. She dragged the stranger into the dark, sealing the door against the prying eyes of the world. Years later, staring at the memorial table with Kwon Chae-woo, the memory remains a heavy, dormant seed. They speak of the stranger's fate with a guarded optimism, wishing for her safety, hoping she found the child she had been running to protect. The peace of the afternoon is broken when Kwon Chae-woo returns from the yard, his presence acting like an anchor in the shifting currents of their conversation. He places an envelope in her hands, a heavy, sealed object bearing the same emblem she has come to associate with a dark, sprawling history. Inside is a map of a different kind of life, an application for employment. But as she scans the document, her heart sinks into a cold, hollow space. The fields meant to define a man's existence, his history, his lineage, his education, are cavernous, empty voids. He leans into her, his forehead resting against hers, his breath a phantom caress. He is asking her to define him, to script the narrative of a man who knows only his own name and the day he was born. She demands his identification, her hands trembling as she takes the laminate card. The face that stares back from the photo is not the man she holds in her arms. It is a predator, eyes cold, features set in a mask of aggressive indifference. It is a stranger in the guise of her husband. She notes the date of birth, and a shiver runs down her spine. It is the anniversary of a horror, the day she stood in the dark and watched him commit an act of chilling, calculated cruelty. That the genesis of his identity should align with the moment she realized he was a monster feels like a cruel, cosmic joke. He leans back, his voice a quiet, inquisitive hum, asking her to fill in the blanks of his schooling. The silence that follows is a chasm. She is poised on the brink of a total confession, tempted to spill the entire, jagged truth of who he is and what he has done, hoping that the weight of it would somehow fuse them together rather than tear them apart. But she hesitates. The fear is a physical constriction in her throat. She is terrified that the truth is a thread that, if pulled, would unravel the only warmth she has left. To keep him is to keep the lie, to expose him is to lose everything. She watches him sigh, his posture relaxing into a melancholic slump, and she buries the truth deep in the quiet, choosing the slow burn of a secret over the cold finality of the truth. He muses, with a trace of dark, self-deprecating humor, that his past was likely less than stellar. She says nothing, the silence between them growing, thick with the weight of all the things that must remain unsaid, and the terrifying certainty that eventually the void will demand to be filled. The atmosphere in the living room is thick with a strange, dissonant static. Lee-yeon traces the empty lines of the application with her gaze, her heart sinking as she offers a half-truth about his past, that he had managed to secure a high school equivalency. He questions it with a haunting desperation, his brow furrowing as he searches for a history that simply is not there. Why did she choose him, he asks, his voice laced with self-loathing. Was his face truly enough to compensate for a life seemingly devoid of substance? She tries to answer, but the words feel inadequate, a shallow tether for a man who is essentially a ghost. He laughs, a dark, jagged sound, and turns his attention to the sections of the form that require more visceral honesty. His dark humor is a weapon, a series of blasphemous, lewd, and terrifying confessions of his true specialties: tracking, violence, and an insatiable, rhythmic hunger for her. Lee-yeon flushes, the heat crawling up her neck, attempting to silence him before the reality of his depravity is etched onto paper. He draws her in, his hands framing her face with a possessive, crushing intensity. Their kiss is an act of drowning. In the fever of it, the light bulb above them shatters, a sudden, violent spark of electrical death that rains glass down upon the floor. She pulls back, eyes wide, transfixed by the ruptured glass, while he bristles, annoyed that her focus has drifted to anything other than the predator hovering over her. Later, a repairman arrives, draped in the anonymity of a violet vest and cap. The air in the house changes the moment their eyes meet. In the kitchen, Lee-yeon observes the mechanic, but her focus is stolen by the man standing beside her. Kwon Chae-woo is a coiled spring, his gaze fixed on the visitor with a cold, predatory focus that seems to vibrate through the walls. It is a tension so acute that the repairman falters, his hands clumsy as he climbs the ladder. Lee-yeon drags her husband away, her voice a sharp, whispered demand for an explanation, but he only offers an evasive, uneasy silence. He cannot name the threat, only sense the wrongness of the man's presence in their sanctuary. In the living room, the repairman, Jang Beam-hee, works with practiced, surgical precision. He does not replace a bulb, he retrieves a scorched wire he had planted himself. It was a catalyst, a way to breach the perimeter. He has watched from the shadows, tortured by the knowledge that the young master he swore to protect has been reduced to a creature of domestic haze, his memories scrubbed clean by some unknown trauma. Jang knows the history of the house, the iron-fisted protection of the older brother, Kwon Chae-woo, whose love for family was a complex, brutal thing. He has tried every key to unlock Chae-woo's mind, the scent of roses, the rhythm of favorite poems, all to no avail. Every attempt to trigger the dormant past has failed, leaving the young master to languish in the soft, dangerous embrace of a woman who knows he is a monster. Jang Beam-hee stares at his own reflection in the glass, his jaw tight. If the master will not reclaim his heritage, if he chooses to remain a toothless beast in this quiet home, then the truth will have to be forced upon him. He realizes that subtlety is a luxury they no longer possess. As he packs his tools, he knows the next intrusion will not be about fixing what is broken. It will be about destroying the illusion that keeps the young master away from his true, violent purpose. The interaction is a masterclass in suppressed violence. As the repairman descends the ladder, the air feels thin, charged with the ozone of an impending storm. Lee-yeon offers a cold drink, a gesture of hollow civility, but her hand trembles as she catches a glimpse of the open toolbox. There, nestled among the sterile steel implements, lies a single red rose. The sight hits her like a physical blow, a symbol of fixation, of a shadow that has been tracking them, petal by petal, into their sanctuary. The moment the man exits, the atmosphere in the house ruptures. Kwon Chae-woo does not walk, he stalks. He leaves Lee-yeon behind, his entire physiology shifting into that of a hound that has caught a scent of blood. Outside, the confrontation is swift and brutal. Jang Beam-hee is slammed against the brickwork, his airway constricted by the iron lock of an elbow. The older man's shock is not born of the physical assault, but of the terrifying lucidity in his master's eyes. He has spent weeks dancing on the periphery, a hotel server, a neighbor, a technician, weaving a web of subtle provocations, and now he is trapped in the center of the trap he helped build. The accusation is sharp: 3 encounters, 3 different masks, 1 singular threat. Kwon Chae-woo's voice is a low, guttural growl, vibrating with the intent to crush anything that dares to disturb the domestic peace he has carved out for his wife. Jang Beam-hee tries to pivot, to shatter the delusion with the only weapon he has left, the past. He speaks of the rose, of thorns, of the fractured mirror of memory, desperate to ignite the devil that once commanded the Kwon family's hunting dogs. But every mention of the young master only seems to tighten the hold on his throat. The struggle is frantic, a blur of muscle and desperate leverage against the wall. Jang Beam-hee is a man pleading with a ghost, begging the shell of his former leader to wake up and acknowledge the blood-stained history they share. He warns that Lee-yeon is a siren, an architect of his amnesia, and that he is merely a hollowed-out puppet playing a domestic game. Kwon Chae-woo's response is a cold, final severance. He does not care for the history he has lost. He does not care for the devil he used to be. He has anchored himself to a present where he is a husband, not a weapon, and he is willing to break bone to keep the fantasy intact. With a final, bone-jarring impact, Jang Beam-hee is pinned once more, his arm twisted until the joint screams in protest. The ultimatum is delivered with a chilling, dead-eyed indifference. The name, the title that bound them together, is stripped away, rendered taboo. As Jang Beam-hee is cast aside, he watches the man he once served walk away, his heart turning to ash. The predator who once held the leash of the family's darkest secrets is gone, replaced by a domestic ghost who prefers the warmth of a lie to the cold, hard clarity of his own violent nature. The repairman stands alone in the yard, trembling, realizing that the man who returned from the mountain is a far more terrifying creature than the one who left, because this version of the devil has decided that he has everything to lose. The ultimatum hangs in the cold air, brittle and final. Kwon Chae-woo turns his back on the broken man with a chilling, polite detachment, a far cry from the feral, blood-letting violence Jang Beam he had once feared. To the former hunter, this new version of his master is not a relief. It is a nauseating, surreal horror. Jang stands in the yard, cradling his bruised arm, watching the silhouette of the man he failed fade into the quiet, domestic safety of a home that shouldn't exist. A shrill vibration in his pocket shatters the silence. It is a text message, an unwanted, persistent echo from a night he desperately wants to relegate to oblivion. A woman's ghost, a body he knows but a name he cannot summon, taunting him with the permanence of touch. Jang sighs, the crushing weight of a life gone sideways pressing down on him. Nothing, not the mission, not the manipulation, not his own desires, is aligning with the path he carved out. In the neon-soaked haze of a local barbecue joint, the air is thick with the smell of char and fermented grain. Ju Dong-mi is in the center of the chaos, her composure dissolving into the messy, uninhibited candor of deep intoxication. She is waxing poetic about tigers and herbivores, her laughter ringing hollow against the heavy, dampened spirit of the table. Lee-yeon watches her, the liquid in her own glass blurring, her thoughts drifting to the last 3 weeks, a timeline cleaved in two by the landslide. The world had shifted, and with it, the stakes of their professional lives. The Spruce Tree Hospital and its rival had been handed a poisoned chalice, a mandate to save the legendary spirit tree. It is a 500-year-old sentinel rumored to house a ghost, a dying, ancient thing that supposedly curses any physician bold enough to touch its bark. The curse is not folklore to the locals. It is a ledger of broken marriages, ruined investments, and inexplicable physical decay. Chu Jae's warning had been a jagged, visceral protest, her disdain for the task as sharp as the knife she used to slice fruit. But Lee-yeon had felt the invisible fingers of fate tightening around her. From the mountain's collapse to this impossible assignment, she suspects a pattern, a tightening of the noose, but she keeps the observation buried beneath the weight of duty. She is a doctor, and she does not choose which lives to mend. The irony is not lost on them. Chu Jae's sarcasm cuts through the somber mood, mocking the evolution of Lee-yeon's heart. She remembers the way Lee-yeon had once loathed the pest in the vegetative state, the way she had woven webs of deceit just to distance herself from his influence. Now, she is the architect of their intimacy, the keeper of his hollowed-out soul. Life has taken on a frantic, unsustainable pace. Kwon Chae-woo, now an intern under Dong-mi's watchful eye, is a ghost of a man learning to navigate the world of animal rescue. He is everywhere, a persistent, gravitational pull. He devours her time, carving out moments for 3 meals a day with a stubbornness that ignores the bounds of propriety. Lee-yeon is living in a state of chronic, quiet anxiety. She fears the chime of the lunch hour, the sudden swing of the door, and the inevitable invasion of his presence. And when the sun dies, the exhaustion truly takes root. His touch is a relentless, nocturnal labor. He demands a price for his devotion that leaves her body feeling fractured, her sleep a forgotten luxury. She stares into the bottom of her glass, a creeping, cold intuition settling in her marrow. They are both earning their wages, they are both performing the roles of the living, but the math does not add up. There is a surplus of intensity, a deficit of rest, and a mounting, unspoken debt that she knows, with terrifying certainty, is finally coming due. The company dinner is less a celebration and more a theater of the absurd, orchestrated by Ju Dong-mi to act as a buffer against the raw, magnetic intensity of Lee-yeon's husband. The restaurant is a cacophony of sizzling fat and clinking glass, but for Lee-yeon, the room narrows until only the man beside her exists. She watches the subtle, predatory grace with which he moves, his presence a silent challenge to the entire table. One sharp strike of his chopsticks against the table, and the surrounding chatter dies a sudden, strangled death. The fear in the eyes of his peers is palpable, a primal reaction to a creature they do not understand, an apex predator forced to sit among the prey. Ju Dong-mi, softened by the haze of too much soju, is a blur of reckless observation. She is a woman untethered, lamenting the absence of the tiger she expected, mocking the husband for his uncharacteristic restraint. Yet, underneath her drunken rambling, she is digging into the past. Her gaze shifts, turning heavy and translucent as she stares at Kwon Chae-woo, and Lee-yeon's heart performs a sickening, stuttering leap. The noise of the restaurant fades, leaving only the thunder of her own blood. Dongmai speaks of a summer in Vienna, years ago, of a child with a face like a porcelain mask and eyes that held a depth far beyond his years. She describes a prodigy, a cellist who performed with the devastating precision of a machine. It is a story of a boy who vanished into the machinery of European acclaim, leaving only a ghost behind. Lee-yeon's skin goes ice-cold. She stares at the man holding her hand under the table, the man whose hands are calloused by wilderness and violence, not the delicate dexterity of a musician. But Dong-mi is insistent, her finger a trembling needle pointing toward a truth that defies the current reality. A mountain climber who carries deer, a rescue intern, and a cellist. The timelines are fractured, the identities overlapping like shadows in a dark room. The tension becomes unbearable when Dong-mi mentions the music at a recent party, the way Kwon Chae-woo had identified a melody with an ease that bordered on the uncanny. Lee-yeon feels the shift in his physiology beside her. He is no longer the patient husband. He is a man cornered by his own discarded history. He attempts to throttle the conversation with a cold command, but Lee-yeon's curiosity is a fire he cannot extinguish. She reminds him of the nights, the quiet, dark hours where she plays music to coax him into a shallow, restless slumber. She whispers the secret observation, the one she has harbored for weeks, that he never cries when he sleeps to the music. He turns to her, his smile a thin, dangerous line that doesn't reach his eyes. He leans into her space, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that bypasses her ears and settles directly into her pulse. He mocks her observation with a dark, carnal implication, stripping away the mystery of the music and replacing it with the reality of their bed. He squeezes her hand, the pressure an agonizing, intimate claim. The promise he makes is a haunting cliffhanger, a question posed in the shadow of his own missing soul. The music may keep the demons at bay, but he has his own methods for ensuring his silence. And tonight, he intends to make sure she discovers exactly what it takes to keep him from weeping. The transition from the restaurant's public noise to the absolute, suffocating silence of their home is instantaneous. There is no preamble, no polite unraveling of the evening. The air inside the house is thick, heavy with the phantom scent of cedar and the sharp, metallic tang of an unresolved hunger. From the moment the door latches shut, the domestic veneer is burned away, replaced by a raw, rhythmic violence that speaks in the language of skin and breath. He is not a husband in these moments. He is a force of nature, a weight that pins her against the world. Every movement is a collision, a frantic attempt to occupy the space where reason used to reside. She is molded against the wall, her arching spine a testament to the sheer velocity of his desire. He chants her name like a prayer, or perhaps a binding spell, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that shatters the last of her coherence. His touch is predatory, possessing a granular focus that strips her of everything but the sensation of being utterly claimed. There is a dark, unsettling edge to his devotion, a whisper of wanting to trap her, to keep her hidden away from the light like a specimen of rare beauty, away from the animals he hunts and the trees that demand her attention. He grips her as if she were the only solid object in a world of ghosts, his own body a temple of straining muscle and popping veins, built solely to house this obsession. As the frantic cadence peaks, the room is filled with the wet, slapping sound of collision and the jagged, broken rhythm of her sobs. She buries her face in her arms, weeping not from grief, but from the terrifying magnitude of being seen, held, and consumed by a man who seems to have forgotten the existence of the rest of the world. In the hollows of her mind, the warnings of the repairman flicker like a dying light, the doubt, the suspicion, the accusation that she is the architect of this beautiful, manufactured delusion. The morning sun is cruel. It reveals the decay that the night had attempted to cloak. In the garden, the osmanthus tree stands as a skeletal monument to negligence, its leaves curled and necrotic. Lee-yeon kneels before it, her hands stained with the tools of resuscitation, nitric acid, calcium, potassium, a desperate attempt to purge the poison of pesticides from the ancient wood. Chu Jae stands over her, a silent observer of the rot. Her gaze is sharp, an analytical blade that drifts from the sickened plant to the woman tending it. As she reaches out to brush a stray lock of hair from Lee-yeon's nape, her hand stalls. The skin there is mapped with the violet, blooming marks of a violent night. She does not comment on the physical evidence, but her silence is a condemnation. What if I tell him? The question drops into the dirt, an unbidden seed. It is the first time the truth has been given a voice, and the weight of it creates a vacuum in the garden. Chu Jae does not feign ignorance. She knows exactly which truth resides behind the question. The air between them turns brittle. Lee-yeon stares at the dying tree, her reflection in the dark, acidic soil offering no absolution. She knows the history of honesty, the way it burns down houses, the way it leaves loved ones cold and distant. But for the first time, she is gripped by a yearning that transcends the safety of her lies. She is terrified of the destruction, yet she is paralyzed by the hunger to be truly, terrifyingly understood by the one man who has already dismantled her reality. She stands on the precipice of a confession that would either cement their sanctuary or turn the earth beneath them to ash, and in the silence of the garden, she realizes she is no longer strong enough to keep holding the sky up by herself. The atmosphere beneath the 500-year-old spirit tree is heavy with the scent of burning incense and the rhythmic, hollow pulse of ceremonial gongs. It is a place where modernity clashes with the visceral, frantic energy of the past. Shamanic dancers, draped in vibrant, chaotic colors, weave around the trunk, their movements a sharp, hypnotic blur. The tree itself is a titan, a gargantuan, twisted monument to endurance, its bark scarred by centuries of human desperation, now adorned with fluttering, colorful offerings that snap in the wind. Amidst this spectacle, the arrival of bureaucrats in tailored suits feels like an intrusion, a jagged, unnatural edge in the landscape. Lee-yeon finds herself in the crosshairs of the director of Mi Hospital, a man who navigates the world with a fan and a mask of calculated innocence. He approaches with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, weaving a cautionary tale of bad omens and professional misfortune. He subtly implies that her recent career, a harrowing climb, a near-death landslide, and now this toxic assignment, is not merely bad luck, but a series of curated catastrophes. His warning is clear: some things are not meant to be saved. Lee-yeon dismisses the superstition, but her own observations offer little comfort. Through her binoculars, the tree is not a mystical protector, but a failing patient. Its architecture is failing, its internal systems collapsing under the weight of neglect. Yet, when she speaks of surgery, of cutting, probing, and intervening, the reaction is explosive. An elder, whose eyes burn with the fervor of a zealot, confronts her. To him, the tree is a saint of the old wars, a survivor that endured the thunder of drums when the town had been razed to ash. He sees her clinical approach as a sacrilege. Lee-yeon's response is detached, almost dangerously logical. She diagnoses the tree's ancient trauma with the cold precision of a surgeon. She identifies the rot, the choked pores, and the lack of basic care, turning the town's religious reverence into a critique of their collective apathy. The confrontation ends with the elder's furious departure, his cane striking the earth like a warning. Lee-yeon is left with a sudden, sharp clarity. She finally understands the nature of the ailment, the hidden decay that no one in the village dared to acknowledge. But as the realization settles, a cold unease washes over her. She turns to anchor herself to the one person who keeps her grounded, only to find the space beside her empty. Kwon Chae-woo has vanished. Her heart begins a frantic, uneven rhythm. She scans the crowd, the panic rising in her throat like bile. In the distance, the shaman, now stripped of the dance, his gaze dark and fixed, is looking directly at her. His attire is archaic, his presence unsettling, and as he holds her stare, the noise of the town seems to dampen into a suffocating, static hum. She is suddenly, acutely aware of how exposed she is in this strange, holy place. Her hands tremble, not from the heat of the day, but from the realization that she has stepped into a game where the rules are not written in medicine, but in blood and ancient, restless shadows. Where is the man who never leaves her side? And why does the air suddenly smell of iron and impending rain? The sudden, cool relief of a chilled bottle pressed against her burning cheek pulls Lee-yeon from her reverie. Kwon Chae-woo stands there, drenched in sweat, his chest heaving with the exertion of an unseen errand. He has run through the heat for her, a gesture so simple yet so piercing that it dissolves the remains of her frantic, shaman-induced panic. He does not speak, he only watches, that same, heavy gaze that feels like a weight she is both burdened and blessed to carry. As they retreat into the shadows of the ancient canopy, the conversation turns clinical, but the undercurrents are dark. Lee-yeon frames their dilemma through a chilling metaphor, a patient whose superficial beauty hides a systemic, life-consuming rot. She speaks of the spirit tree not as a deity, but as a victim of institutional cowardice. She sees the corruption clearly, the hospitals that fear liability, the city officials scavenging for coin, and the shaman who turns fear into a profitable theater. The horror stories are merely armor, a way to ensure that if the 500-year-old titan finally dies, the blame can be pinned on ghosts rather than men. Lee-yeon's resolve hardens. The air feels charged, electric with the intent of a woman who has decided to dismantle a rigged system. She will not be another coward hiding behind a myth. Then, the world narrows. Kwon Chae-woo pulls her into his chest, his frame acting as a wall between her and the encroaching chaos. Through the gap in his shoulder, she glimpses the shaman. The figure is no longer dancing. He is a predator standing still, his eyes fixed on them with a disturbing, clairvoyant weight. It looks like the willow branch is also going to fall soon. It is going to hurt a lot. The words are a death knell. In the language of the old, a falling willow is a final, severed goodbye, the ending of a bond with the one who anchors your soul. The shaman's voice is cold, steady, and terrifyingly accurate. Lee-yeon feels the walls of her own secret closing in, the oxygen thinning until she is gasping into the fabric of Chae-woo's shirt. Her hands tremble as she hides them in the folds of her dress. The guilt, once a muffled ache, has become a roar. She realizes that she cannot sustain this. She cannot continue to build a life upon a foundation of sand. If she wants the connection to survive, she must risk the destruction of the truth. As they walk away from the ceremony, the weight of the confession she has prepared for the end of the competition begins to manifest. Her voice is thin, brittle as dead leaves. Chae-woo, I have something to tell you. He waits, his expression unreadable, his presence an anchor that she is about to either rely on or shatter forever. She forces the words out, a jagged confession that she has been a weaver of lies since the day their paths first collided 2 years ago. The sky feels vast and indifferent, and the wind begins to pick up, whispering through the dry, dying leaves of the great tree. She is finally stepping off the ledge of her own safety, and for the first time, she cannot see what lies beneath, only the terrifying certainty that, by the time she finishes speaking, the branch will have already fallen. The office is a tomb of ticking seconds and white noise. Outside, the night is a bruised purple, heavy with the humidity of an impending storm. Lee-yeon is submerged in the cold, clinical glow of her monitor, mapping out a surgical plan to save a titan. She is so deeply entrenched in the pathology of the tree that she doesn't hear him until the floorboards groan. Kwon Chae-woo stands in the doorway, a silhouette of impatient longing. He is a man struggling to tether himself to the floor while his mind is clearly drifting toward her desk. The banter that follows is laced with a dangerous, unspoken tension, his dark, predatory playfulness clashing with her desperate, professional focus. When she finally notices him, his eyes possess that familiar, unsettling clarity, a look that suggests he is not interested in her research, but in consuming the peace she is so painstakingly trying to preserve. He vanishes into the hallway, leaving behind a vacuum of unspoken requests. Moments later, he returns with an armful of her belongings, turning a mundane task into a frantic, intimate ritual of choosing clothes and tools for the day ahead. He is needy, his movements sharp and hurried, his entire demeanor shifting with every word she offers. When she finally breaks, confessing that it is him, not the work, not the prestige, but him, that she prefers above all else, his reaction is total. He stands rooted, his face flushing a deep, violent red, as if her sincerity has struck him with the force of a physical blow. The morning brings the abrupt, icy shock of reality. The competition, for which they have sacrificed so much, has been hollowed out. Their rival, the director of Mi Hospital, has vanished into the wreckage of a car accident, leaving Spruce Tree Hospital to claim victory by default. But the air at the site is not celebratory. It is suffocating with hostility. As Lee-yeon and Chu Jae approach the spirit tree, the atmosphere is electric. A bottle of soju arcs through the air, a glass comet that shatters mere inches from their feet, showering the ground in jagged, lethal diamonds. The townspeople are not guardians of a holy site, they are mob protecting a scam. Lee-yeon realizes the truth with a sickening clarity. The horror stories, the shaman's theatrics, the decades of treatments, it was all a lucrative, institutionalized grift. The locals aren't defending a god, they are defending their own pockets. The tree is not a sacred entity, but a victim of systematic exploitation, left to wither so that its dying branches can continue to be sold to the superstitious for a premium price. The crowd closes in, a sea of hostile faces and cameras turned into weapons. Lee-yeon feels the crushing weight of their contempt, the scorecards of the judges held like sharpened spears. She is standing on the edge of professional suicide. If she fails here, the fallout will be total. Her reputation, her career, and the fragile life she has built with Chae-woo will be dismantled. She steadies herself, her hands gripping the rungs of the ladder until her knuckles turn white. The tree above her is silent, a dying monarch waiting for the blade. She looks at the encroaching mob, then at the sky, breathing in the scent of damp earth and rot. She has a partner now. A man who trusts her with the intensity of a caged beast. If she falls, he falls with her. With a final, bracing inhale, she lifts the ladder toward the dying canopy, fully aware that she is about to expose a rot far deeper than the one in the wood. As her boot touches the first rung, she wonders if the town will let her come back down. The air around the ancient, dying sentinel is no longer merely heavy, it is ionizing. The crowd has devolved into a chorus of frantic, guttural wails, a mob desperate to protect a ghost that is rapidly being surgically unmasked. Through the chaos, Kwon Chae-woo cuts a path, his focus narrowing until the world outside of Lee-yeon ceases to exist. High above, suspended by ropes that look like spider silk threads against a vast, indifferent sky, she is a silhouette of concentrated violence. She does not move like a physician, she moves like an executioner, the roaring chainsaw in her hands a testament to her intent to excise the rot. Each branch that strikes the earth is a hammer blow to the collective delusion of the town. The people shriek as if it were their own limbs being severed, their grief a visceral, ugly thing. But on the scaffolding, Lee-yeon is oblivious to the theatre of the damned. She has found the source of the contagion, a cavernous wound deep within the tree's spine, a necrotic epicenter teeming with life that feeds on decay. Her face is smeared with the grime of the living earth, her expression a terrifying, resolute mask of purpose. Kwon Chae-woo watches from below, his throat tight, his entire physiology straining with a primal need to bridge the distance between them. In this moment, she is not his domestic companion. She is a savage architect of survival, and the sight of her raw, unfiltered competence triggers something ancient in his blood. But then, the atmosphere shifts. His attention is pulled by an anchor of malice in the crowd. The shaman, the man of rituals and riddles, is watching him, not the tree. There is no dance now, only a fixed, predatory stare that feels like a cold needle against Chae-woo's skin. From the silence of the distance, the man's lips move in a silent, perfectly legible prophecy. When the moon is full, the dog wails. The reaction is immediate. Chae-woo's skull erupts in white-hot agony, the sensation of iron bludgeons splintering his thoughts. He bites into his own tongue, the sharp, copper tang of blood flooding his mouth as he forces his body to hold its ground. When his vision clears, the shaman has vanished, leaving only a psychic residue of terror and the lingering whisper of a final, haunting command. You'll be back. Tonight. The transformation is complete. The great, mystical protector is gone, replaced by a stripped, scrawny skeleton of wood, exposed and shivering in the harsh light of the afternoon. The operation has spanned 5 agonizing hours, a grueling campaign against entropy. When Lee-yeon finally descends, her limbs are shivering, her spirit drained by the sheer weight of the intrusion. The mob surges, their anger reaching a fever pitch, but they break like waves against the shore when they meet the cold, unyielding wall of Chae-woo's presence. He stands by her side, a guardian hound who has tasted blood. Lee-yeon blinks, returning to the world of the living, her eyes softening as she finds him there. When he leans down to press his cheek to hers, the intimacy of the gesture feels like a desperate, impossible reprieve. She pulls away, laughing nervously as she points to the filth that coats her skin, unaware that the darkness has already begun its descent. The sun is setting, and the moon is rising, and the dog has yet to begin its wail. The air at the village shrine is cooling, the sunset painting the horizon in bruised violets and dying embers. Lee-yeon stands before the skeletal remains of the spirit tree, her hand resting against its wounded bark. Beside her, Kwon Chae-woo is unnervingly cold, his skin a stark contrast to the humid, sweltering tension of the day. He clings to her with a possessive, almost frantic desperation, as if he is trying to anchor a ghost that is already beginning to drift away. Lee-yeon speaks of her past, her voice soft and nostalgic, unburdening a secret she has carried since childhood. She tells him of a singing tree, her lonely, private sanctuary, a guardian that hummed melodies to her grief and danced to her joy. It was a fairy tale she lived in, a fragile world of post-it notes and hidden letters tucked into hollows of wood, written to an invisible friend who never replied. As she narrates, the world around them begins to warp. Chae-woo's vision swims, the edges of reality fraying like wet paper. Lee-yeon's face flickers in his perception, oscillating between the woman he knows and a younger, uniformed girl, a ghost of the past manifesting in the twilight. He feels a sickening, black miasma bubbling up from the depths of his own forgotten consciousness, a visceral, suffocating repulsion that feels like drowning in ink. She reveals the truth of the tree. It wasn't magic, it was human. A girl she once hid, a secret playmate who had been the unseen musician behind the music. And the final revelation, the cache of old, familiar records buried beneath the roots, hits Chae-woo like a physical blow. His stomach turns. The nausea is absolute, a swamp of dark, repressed recognition that threatens to tear him apart from the inside. The melody she describes, the teasing, the dancing, the comfort, is not a distant, innocent memory for him. It is a jagged, broken piece of his own missing soul. He squeezes her hand, the sensation no longer romantic, but a desperate, white-knuckled attempt to keep the past from swallowing him whole. He feels the black ink of those memories leaking into his mind, poisoning the sanctity of their shared life. Lee-yeon is smiling, lost in the sweetness of her recollection, utterly unaware that the gift she unearthed under the roots has acted as a catalyst for a nightmare. The wind picks up, whistling through the empty, stripped branches of the spirit tree, and for a terrifying second, the melody she speaks of seems to echo from the very ground beneath their feet. Chae-woo fights the urge to scream, his eyes fixed on the woman whose childhood secret is now, with exquisite cruelty, the key to his own undoing. The air between them is thick with a dissonance that Chae-woo can no longer mask. He presents his gift, a small, wooden blossom carved from the heart of the tree they had just dismantled. It is a clumsy, visceral thing, the petals stained not with dye, but with the copper-rich reality of his own blood. When he admits that the crimson tint was a deliberate, almost ritualistic choice, the confession hangs in the air, a silent alarm bell that Lee-yeon chooses to ignore, burying the carving against her chest as if she can absorb his volatility into her own heart. That night, the house is a sanctuary of deceptive stillness. Lee-yeon lies in the dark, her mind rehearsing the confession she plans to offer at dawn, the story of their first meeting, the web of half-truths, the reality of the girl who once played songs for a lonely child. Beside her, Chae-woo is a hollowed-out shell. He sleeps with a terrifying, absolute detachment, his usual nocturnal magnetism replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence. She curls into the space where his warmth should be, lulled into a false sense of security by the rhythm of his breathing and the familiar, grounding scent of him, unaware that she is drifting toward an abyss. The morning breaks not with the soft light of promise, but with the jagged, relentless shrieking of an alarm. It is a sound that should have shattered the calm, yet Chae-woo remains anchored to the sheets, a statue carved from exhaustion or something far more sinister. Lee-yeon's morning ritual, the gentle pestering, the familiar, sleepy grumbles, the warm press of his lips against her skin, is gone. The silence that fills the room is not the quiet of sleep, it is the quiet of a tomb. She shakes him, her fingers sinking into the solid weight of his shoulders, but there is no resistance, no spark of life to meet her touch. The air in the room turns arctic. Dark clouds gather outside, pressing against the windowpane like heavy, liquid grief. As she calls his name, her voice cracks, stripped of its authority, reduced to a desperate, trembling plea. She stares at him, waiting for the flicker of an eyelid, the tension of a muscle, anything to suggest that the man she went to sleep with is still there. But he is a monument to an impenetrable, sudden absence. The realization hits her with a force that leaves her lungs empty. The confession she held in her heart is now a letter addressed to a ghost, and the man who promised to stay by her side has left her behind in the deafening, frozen dark. The morning sun offers no warmth, only a harsh, clinical illumination of the tragedy unfolding in the bedroom. Lee-yeon's movements are frantic, a desperate choreography of pleading and prodding, yet the man beside her remains a statue of impenetrable calm. His heart beats, his chest rises and falls with rhythmic indifference, but the spark, the volatile, magnetic essence of Kwon Chae-woo, has retreated behind a door that Lee-yeon cannot find. She wipes his skin, speaks his name until her voice rasps like dry leaves, and eventually collapses into the hollow silence that follows. He is here, yet he is nowhere. He is a vessel, a shell left behind by a tide that has pulled away, leaving her stranded on the sand. The desperation eventually gives way to a sterile, terrifying logic. When she finally reaches out to the doctor, her words are fractured, spilling out in the wet, jagged rhythm of pure, unadulterated terror. He isn't just sleeping, he has vanished into the architecture of his own fractured mind. The village is a theater of quiet hostility. The sacred tree, once a monument of mythic grandeur, now stands as a scrawny, scarred reminder of human hubris. Lee-yeon moves through the site like a ghost, her professional armor holding her together while her private world remains in a state of catatonic suspension. The director of the beauty hospital follows her, his presence a buzzing nuisance, his own brush with disaster, a wrecked car and a crushed ego, serving as a backdrop to Lee-yeon's much deeper, silent ruin. He talks of ghost stories and luck, of boulders falling from clear skies, unaware that the true haunting is the man currently trapped in a slumber of infinite depth. Lee-yeon deflects his inanity with a sharp, lethal wit, weaponizing the project's success to distract from the hollow ache in her chest. She is the doctor of a dead god, meticulously charting the recovery of wood and leaf while the love of her life remains locked in a dark, waking tomb. Work becomes a rhythmic, anesthetic haze. She treats the tree with force and surgical precision, the physical labor the only thing preventing her from unraveling. But in the quiet moments, the phantom sensation of his touch lingers, the ghost of a thumb sweeping a stray hair from her brow, the warmth of his hand on her lobe, a sensory echo that burns more than any fire. She has become a master of the mask, her face a cool, unreadable surface. Kwon Chae-woo watches her with the sharp, sympathetic eyes of a sentinel, guarding the secret of Lee-yeon's shattered reality. As the humidity of the long, suffocating rainy season finally breaks, the calendar turns a page that feels like a sentence. It has been a month. 1 month of silence. 1 month of lying in bed beside a body that is breathing, but not living. And in the oppressive stillness of the house, the question remains. If she continues to wait, will he eventually find his way back to the surface, or is the man she loves already a casualty of the very history she failed to tell him in time? The house has become a tomb of suspended animation. Outside, the summer sun bleeds gold across the floorboards, but inside, the air is perennially arctic. Kwon Chae-woo lies in the center of the bed, a beautiful, hollow effigy, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that mocks the frantic instability of Lee-yeon's own heart. She spends her hours as a vigilante of the unconscious, cleaning him, watching him, tracing the lines of his unresponsive face as if she could map her way back into his mind. She speaks to him not with the hope of a return, but with the desperate persistence of a woman trying to keep a tether from snapping. She tells him of her work, of her patience, and of the agonizing, bone-deep loneliness that grows in the silence. It is a one-sided conversation with a shadow. Some nights, she wakes in a sweat, her fingers frantic against his throat, terrified that the warmth she feels is merely the fading heat of a life that has already quietly checked out. Then there is Ji-baek, a boy whose youthful cynicism cuts through the heavy atmosphere like a dull blade. To him, Chae-woo is not a tragedy. He is a creature of nature, an old monkey or a hibernating bear, a male who has simply chosen to opt out of reality. His blunt, dark humor is a jarring, painful comfort to Lee-yeon. He speaks of abandonment as if it were a simple, biological truth, a cycle of rot and renewal that she is foolish to resist. As she pats his head, she feels the weight of a grim prophecy. Perhaps she is destined for a life of perpetual waiting, a caretaker of dormant things, forever bracing for the arrival of a day that may never come. The world outside, however, refuses to pause. The clinic is buzzing with the aftermath of their surgical intervention on the spirit tree, the prestige of the event drawing interest like flies to a wound. Lee-yeon buries herself in the work, the blueprints, the soil samples, the cold, hard logic of irrigation and root systems. It is the only way she can keep the encroaching listlessness from pulling her under. She is standing on a construction site, explaining the pathology of a suffocating tree, when her phone vibrates against her thigh. The movement is violent, a sudden intrusion of the living world. She glances down, and the name on the screen freezes her blood. Kwon Chae-woo. The air leaves her lungs. The name is a key, and it feels as though someone has just turned it in the lock of a door she thought she had boarded up forever. The ghost of her past has finally tracked her down, and as she stares at the glowing screen, she realizes that the silence of the house, the hibernation of her husband, and the rot of the spirit tree were all merely the calm before a much colder, much sharper storm. The name on the screen is a physical blow, a sudden, sharp intake of breath that leaves Lee-yeon reeling as if she has walked headlong into an invisible wall. The vibration against her thigh is not just a digital signal. It is a summons from a past she had desperately tried to bury beneath layers of daily routine and the crushing, quiet weight of her husband's catatonic sleep. As she stands amidst the dirt and skeletal trees of the construction site, the arrival of the car is a slow-motion inevitability. A sleek, black sedan glides into view, cutting through the dusty air with surgical precision. When the door opens, Kwon Chae-woo emerges, a silhouette of expensive fabric, polished leather, and the cold, unyielding intellect of a man who sees the world as a game of chess. His silver-rimmed glasses catch the sunlight, obscuring his eyes, yet his gaze is a laser pointed straight at her. The phone in her pocket continues its rhythmic, insistent drumming against her skin. It is the heartbeat of a ghost, demanding audience. She feels the invisible tether tightening around her throat, pulling her toward the sedan with the terrifying grace of a predator beckoning its prey. Kwon Chae-woo's protective instincts flare, a silent protest against the danger approaching, but Lee-yeon knows the futility of resistance. Some debts cannot be settled by the police, they can only be paid by walking directly into the fire. Inside, the car is an airtight vault, smelling faintly of expensive tobacco and sterilized steel. Ki-suk reclines, his posture one of bored superiority. He does not offer a greeting. Instead, he speaks in a voice that is a clinical detachment from humanity, a sound that chills the air more effectively than the air conditioning. He drops a bombshell that shatters her reality. He has found the culprit, the architect of their misery, the man who laid waste to their lives 2 years ago. Lee-yeon's hands, resting on her knees, tremble as she takes the file. The photograph is a relic of her darkest hour, the man whose violence had been the catalyst for her husband's shattered memory and their forced disappearance into a life of hiding. Seeing his face, captured in the cold, black and white clarity of a dossier, feels like a sudden, sickening drop in temperature. Ki-suk offers her a gilded cage, freedom. He speaks of absolution, of clearing her name, of untethering her from the crimes and burdens she has been carrying like a lead vest. But Lee-yeon knows the nature of the man across from her. He is a collector of leverage, a man who does not give without taking. As she stares at the file, the euphoria of exoneration is quickly eclipsed by a creeping, suffocating dread. She is being offered her life back, but she cannot shake the feeling that the price for this freedom is something she has yet to pay. The silence in the car is absolute, save for the hum of the engine, as she looks at the man who has the power to either save her or finish the destruction he started. As she processes the information, the question hangs in the heavy, cigar-scented air. Is this truly salvation, or has she just walked into the next act of a meticulously planned betrayal? The car ride transforms into a claustrophobic interrogation, the leather seats groaning beneath them like a warning of structural failure. Ki-suk sits as the architect of her ruin, offering a deal that tastes like ash. Freedom is dangled before her, a complete erasure of the charges that have held her life hostage, but the price is the only thing that has kept her heart beating. He wants Chae-woo. He wants to harvest the sleeper, to reclaim the brother who was the victim of his own violence. Lee-yeon's defiance is brittle, a thin glass shield against the icy charisma of a man who weaponizes the truth as easily as he breathes. When she questions his motives, Ki-suk leans in, the proximity stripping away the last of her defenses. He does not see her as an enemy. He sees her as a mirror. The revelation that he finds a kindred spirit in her capacity for deceit is a jagged shard of glass to her soul. It is a visceral, psychological violation, an accusation that she is just as fundamentally broken as the man she has been protecting. The room grows cold, the air thick with the scent of cigars and the metallic tang of impending loss. Ki-suk's parting words serve as a final, cryptic strike. He suggests that the man she has been sheltering, the man whose wound she has been tending for a month of silent vigils, is not the man she thinks he is. He casts doubt on the entire foundation of their life, whispering that reality has been a carefully constructed, elaborate fraud. Lee-yeon returns home to a house that feels like a tomb, the darkness heavy and expectant. She is a woman haunted by the possibility that she has been nursing a stranger. Then, the shadow shifts. The silhouette rises from the gloom, and the breath leaves her body in a shuddering sob. Kwon Chae-woo stands there. He is awake. The silence of the past month is shattered, replaced by the crushing weight of his presence. But as he steps into the faint light, a chilling detail takes hold. His hands are bound. A thin, silver thread, sharp as a razor and woven with the precision of a spider's trap, is coiled around his fingers. With every movement, the wire bites into his skin, turning his flesh a bruised, angry red. He smiles, a gesture that should be a homecoming, yet feels entirely alien. There is something in his eyes that does not belong to the man who fell asleep in her arms. The thread, the blood, the stillness of his demeanor. It is as if he has returned, not from a dream, but from a puppet master's workshop. He greets her with a warmth that feels like a serrated blade against her throat, and as he tightens his grip on the silver wire, the house feels less like a home and more like a carefully baited snare. The dream is a corridor of sensory decay. It begins not with sight, but with a sound, a shrill, parasitic vibrato that peels back the layers of consciousness until the mind is raw and exposed. Kwon Chae-woo is adrift in this fog, a prisoner to a rhythm he cannot escape, where the air itself seems to vibrate with the agony of 1,000 screaming strings. Then, the mist fractures. He is no longer the man haunted by a coma, but a boy possessed. On a stage bathed in artificial white light, he is a virtuoso of the dark. He handles the guarneri with a fervor that borders on the profane, his every movement a violent symphony. He is a conduit for something ancient and hungry, drawing sound from the wood that feel like velvet dragged across open wounds. The audience is held captive by the spectacle, unaware that they are witnessing a soul in the process of being bargained away. But the symphony is a fragile artifice, shattered in an instant by the sharp, cruel intrusion of reality. A single phone call, a voice sobbing in the dark, a declaration of a senseless, brutal death, and the music stops forever. The cello, once an extension of his own nervous system, becomes nothing more than a dead, hollow shell of timber. The prodigy is extinguished, leaving behind a vacuum that refuses to remain empty. The scene shifts, and the stage is replaced by a cage of rusted iron and stale blood. This is the new music. In this memory, the elegance of the concert hall is traded for the primal, sweating heat of the underground fight ring. He is no longer a muse for the arts, but a master of anatomical destruction. He moves with a calculated, terrifying efficiency, his body a map of taut muscle and bulging, serpentine veins. There is no trace of the musician here, only the predatory stillness of a man who has learned that life is cheap and pain is the only language that commands respect. He kneels on the spine of a man who is thrashing in the dirt, a living, screaming fish hooked on a line of rope. Chae-woo's face is a study in chilling contrast, a sinister, upward curve of the lips, eyes that mirror the dead, flat reflection of a shark. He speaks to the broken thing beneath him with a dark, mocking humor, a lecture on the preciousness of life delivered while his fingers tighten around the throat of his prey. 6 years. That is the length of time he has been feeding this new, ravenous hunger. 6 years since the music died and the violence became the only melody he could stand to hear. As he stands in the reeking cage, wiping the grime from his skin with a towel offered by a trembling acolyte, the reality of his existence settles over him. He is a man who destroyed the sublime to make room for the grotesque. And now, as he wakes in the dark of his own home with silver threads biting into his flesh, he realizes that the cage was never really left behind. He has simply moved into a larger, more elaborate one. The transition from prodigy to predator was not a fall, it was a transmutation. The cello, an instrument designed to mimic the human soul's deepest registers, had been the first casualty of his awakening. In the cold, subterranean darkness of the Kwon family's private militia, Kwon Chae-woo learned that violence possessed its own cadence, a jagged, dissonant music that demanded a different kind of devotion. He traded the silk of a bow for the iron of a cage, finding that the screams of broken men offered a far more visceral, intoxicating resonance than any concerto ever could. The memories are not mere echoes, they are shackles. He remembers the hunt, the secrets hidden beneath the veneer of family loyalty, and the woman who was at once his mother, his savior, and his architect of ruin. She was the one who hid him in the belly of a cello case, smuggling him away into a life built on a foundation of impossible lies. He wakes now, not in the sweat-slicked cage of his past, but in the sterile, air-conditioned silence of a life that does not belong to him. His body is a map of trauma, his ribs pulsing with the dull ache of long inactivity. The room is a curated fiction, a sanctuary of medical monitors and domestic normalcy that feels like a costume he has been forced to wear. His movements are a study in sensory betrayal. His mind is a fractured mirror, struggling to reconcile the lethal efficiency of his muscles with the soft, alien surroundings. He tears the adhesive leads from his skin, the sharp sting a welcome anchor to reality. He stalks through the house, his gaze raking over the domestic debris, matching mugs, whimsical trinkets, the saccharine architecture of a life fabricated by someone else. Every object is a lie, a nauseating layer of paint applied over a void. His stomach churns with a primal, suffocating repulsion. He is a wolf waking up in a sheepfold, and the sheer audacity of the staging triggers a violent kinetic response. The veins in his forehead writhe as the suppressed memories, the true purpose of his presence here, come rushing back with the force of a landslide. He is not a patient. He is not a husband. He is a seeker of vengeance, and the fog that had dulled his edges for months is finally burning away. The objective coalesces in his mind with the cold, crystalline clarity of a blade being drawn from a sheath. The name burns on his tongue like a lit fuse. So Lee-yeon. He had come to this island, to this stage-managed hell, for one solitary purpose, to hunt her down. As he stands at the precipice of his own realization, the house feels less like a home and more like the interior of a trap he has finally learned how to dismantle. The game is over, and the predator has finally remembered his teeth. The silence of the house is pulverized by a single, violent impact. The door does not merely open, it is unhinged, yielding to the kind of force that only a man who has weaponized his own existence can muster. Jang Beam Hee, caught in the sterile glow of his surveillance hub, scrambles for his baton, but the sight of the intruder drains the air from his lungs. Kwon Chae-woo stands there, a spectre risen from the grave of his own coma, his eyes burning with the cold, predatory clarity of a predator that has finally found the trail. He descends upon Beam-hee like a landslide, a blur of white-knuckled rage and calculated menace. The man who had been a dormant shell for months is gone, replaced by the lethal, efficient instrument of the Kwon family's shadow war. He demands an explanation, and when he turns his gaze to the wall of screens, the temperature in the room drops to a sub-zero crawl. The wall is a shrine to So Lee-yeon. Candid shots, candid moments, the evidence of a domestic life that Chae-woo recognizes only as a foreign, nausea-inducing dream. He stares at the images of himself, smiling, touching, kissing, with the detached, visceral revulsion of a man looking at a crime scene. To him, this isn't romance. It is a meticulously crafted cage, a theater of deceit where he was the lead actor playing a role he never auditioned for. He speaks of her not with affection, but with the sharp, jagged bitterness of a man realizing he has been poisoned. He remembers the physical intimacy, the hunger, the proximity, but he rejects the context. He views his own past behavior as the actions of a drugged animal, a man whose autonomy was stripped away and replaced with a puppet strings. Beam-hee, trembling under the weight of his master's sudden, terrifying restoration, offers a fractured defense. He confirms the surveillance, the wiretaps, the entire apparatus of domestic sabotage. Chae-woo listens to the list of bugs, his jaw working as he processes the violation of his own private life. The humorless smirk that plays across his lips is a warning. He is a man whose boundaries have been breached, and he intends to burn the evidence of his own humiliation. The interrogation hits a harrowing crescendo when Chae-woo demands to know if his intimate moments were recorded. The air becomes electrified with psychological tension as he forces his subordinate to confront the ugliness of their espionage. Beam-hee's frantic denials provide no comfort. For Chae-woo, the damage is already done. He is no longer the man who slept through the summer, comforted by a woman's touch. He is the man who woke up to find his entire reality was a lie, and he is preparing to dismantle the stage, piece by agonizing piece. The hunt has officially begun, and in this house of mirrors, the predator is finally looking for the exit. The air in the room is thick with the scent of ozone and stale secrets. Jang Beam-hee stands rigid, a sentinel to a past that his master is currently dismantling with surgical, heartless precision. Kwon Chae-woo stares at the monitors, his reflection ghosting over images of himself, the man who was, the man who was played, and the man who was nothing more than a fiction. He traces the outline of a betrayal that spans years. The revelation that his existence has been a collaborative fabrication, a play directed by his own brother and performed by the woman he once held close, strikes him not with sorrow, but with the cold, invigorating sting of absolute clarity. His memories of that house, those shared nights, and the suffocating domesticity are now revealed as a psychological prison, constructed with forged documents and manufactured intimacy. He watches the digital trail of their movements. Ki-suk and Lee-yeon, captured in the stark, unforgiving light of a car park. They are the architects of his eclipse. Chae-woo's laughter is a dry, grating sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It is the sound of a man who has finally found the bottom of the well. He realizes now that the man who loved So Lee-yeon was a vestigial organ, a weak, naive sketch of himself that he can afford to erase. The husband is dead. The hound has simply reclaimed the leash. He reaches into the shadows of the toolbox, his fingers brushing against the familiar, cold bite of a wire, the same wire he once used to turn the tide in the blood-soaked rings of his youth. The metal coils around his palm like a sleeping viper, a promise of the violence to come. He will play the part. He will return to that house, that cozy, curated trap, and he will continue the pantomime of the doting husband. He will be the shadow that feeds on her trust, a mirror reflecting her own deceit back at her until the image shatters. He does not seek redemption, he seeks a reckoning. The woman who dared to occupy his bed and curate his memories will soon find that her greatest mistake was not killing him when he was vulnerable. He is no longer the man who slept through the season. He is the man who woke up to find his life stolen, and he is coming home to collect the debt. As he turns toward the window, looking out toward the house where she waits, the silhouette of his shoulders is broad, unyielding, and utterly devoid of mercy. The curtain on their domestic tragedy has officially fallen, and the real performance is only just beginning. The homecoming is a physical assault on the senses. The air in the house is saturated with her, a scent that once acted as a narcotic to his former, hollow self, grounding him in a domestic stupor. Now, It is the smell of a cage, and the immediate, treacherous response of his own body, the involuntary tightening of his nerves, is a violation he finds intolerable. He throws the windows open, desperate to purge the atmosphere of her lingering presence, to scrub the invisible stains of her influence from the air he breathes. He is not a man returning to his wife. He is a predator reclaiming his territory from an intruder. The disruption comes in the form of Jiu Baek. The boy stands in the living room, a creature of bizarre, insect-obsessed wisdom, and freezes as he beholds the man standing where the old monkey used to be. The recognition is instant and primal. The boy, who once treated the master of this house with a mixture of pity and disdain, now recoils as if he has spotted a viper in the tall grass. His frantic retreat behind the sofa and his shrill cry of imposter are the first cracks in the charade. Chae-woo corners him. He moves with the terrifying efficiency of an apex hunter, pinning the boy to the sofa. The interaction is a jarring dissonance of dark intellect and childhood trauma. Jiu Baek's frantic, erratic analogies, the mantis, the spider, the metamorphosis, are the desperate warnings of a creature that recognizes a predator before the prey has even caught the scent. The boy's eyes, wide and dilated, act as a mirror. He sees the wickedness that the mask of the husband could never hide. The comparison to a gambling uncle, a man who steals from his own kin, lands with a cold, accurate sting. Chae-woo looms over him, his patience eroding like stone under a relentless tide. He forces the boy to look at him, to acknowledge the reality of the shift. He is not here to be saved, and neither is the woman who orchestrated this entire theater. He is here to dominate the narrative. He demands the boy's silence, a brutal ultimatum delivered with the casual menace of someone who sees human lives as expendable variables in a larger, more violent equation. When the boy finally collapses into a shell of defeated silence, Chae-woo experiences a flicker of something that feels like empathy, but he discards it instantly. He knows it is a ghost, a residual echo of the man who occupied this body before his return. He refuses to be the victim of his own biology. His gaze drifts to the rope coiled in his hand, a smooth, familiar weight that promises the resolution he craves. The singing tree, the obsession of the wiretaps, the echoes of a 15-year-old grudge, it all begins to align. He hums a low, discordant note, the sound of a man finding his rhythm in the dark. The hunt has entered its second stage, and as he waits for Lee-yeon to walk through that door, the predator is perfectly, deathly still. He knows she is coming, and he knows that, at long last, the performance is about to turn into a massacre. The threshold of the house acts as a boundary between two realities. One is the desperate, fraying hope Lee-yeon has clung to during the silent, rainy months of his absence. The other is the cold, calculated performance that now stands before her. She sees the man she has been nursing back to life, the object of her singular, exhausting devotion. She falls into his arms with the frantic, unmoored relief of a castaway finding solid ground, unaware that the ground beneath her feet has just become a snare. He holds her with a precision that mimics affection, his body a solid, warm wall. Yet, the way he anchors her, the subtle pressure of his chin against her hair, feels less like an embrace and more like a predator securing its catch. He speaks of dreams, weaving a dark, allegorical tapestry of woodcutters and sacrificed deer. It is a fairy tale told with the jagged edge of a serrated blade, a warning wrapped in the velvet of intimacy. Lee-yeon, blinded by her own yearning, hears only the man she thought she knew. She does not see the way his eyes remain fixed and glassy, reflecting the dark corners of the room rather than her own face. The atmosphere shifts with the sudden, violent efficiency of a trap springing shut. The mention of his brother, the name Kisuk, acts as a catalyst, dissolving the tender mask he has been wearing. The air grows heavy, stripped of its domestic comfort. When he pulls away, the physical distance between them is not just a gap in space, but a fundamental tearing of the fabric of her reality. His touch is no longer a caress, it is an interrogation. He closes the distance with the predatory focus of a man who has decided exactly how he wants his prey to behave. His words are calculated violation, a sudden and grotesque departure from the language of their shared life. He forces her into a corner, his fingers digging into her skin, leaving crescent-shaped marks of possession. There is no warmth in his gaze, only a clinical, testing cruelty. He demands a response to an impossible question, anchoring her to the prospect of his brother's death as if it were a test of her devotion. Lee-yeon freezes, the realization dawning on her that the man who held her just moments ago has been replaced by someone, or something, entirely devoid of the tenderness she thought she had earned. The room feels smaller, the darkness more absolute, and as she stares into the void of his expression, she realizes that the person she spent months protecting has never truly existed. The question hangs in the air, a lethal ultimatum. Does she choose the man she loves, or does she acknowledge the monster he has revealed himself to be? As his grip tightens, she understands that answering correctly may be the only way to survive the night. The air between them has curdled. Where once there was the practiced rhythm of domestic intimacy, there is now a jagged, unbridgeable chasm. Lee-yeon stands in the gloom, her pulse drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs, while Chae-woo looms over her, a silhouette of calculated, predatory menace. Every word he speaks is a probe, a surgical strike designed to see how much of the old lie she is willing to hold on to. When she dares to voice the suspicion that claws at her throat, asking if he is truly the man she nursed, he doesn't flinch. He weaponizes the question, turning the weight of her doubt back upon her like a mirror. He smells the lingering ghost of Kisuk on her, a faint, metallic trace of the outside world that drives his frustration into a fever pitch. He is a predator forced to play the part of a domesticated pet, and the act is chafing against his skin like a hair shirt. Lee-yeon plays her hand with a desperate, trembling grace. She talks of trees and flowers, of the simple, unburdened life she chose to hide behind, attempting to shield her reality from the encroaching darkness. Her refusal to engage with his violent hypotheticals is a lifeline she throws into the abyss, hoping he will take it. She offers him the only currency she has, a vision of a future that does not involve blood. But as she retreats to the bathroom, the mask he wears begins to fracture. The moment the door clicks shut, the loving husband dissolves. The man left standing in the living room is a stranger to his own biology, fighting a war against the physical cravings that her proximity has ignited. He is starved, not for affection, but for dominance, his own body betraying his cold, murderous intent with pulses of raw, aching desire that make him want to tear the world apart. Then, the script is appended. Lee-yeon bursts from the bedroom, her face flushed, her voice tight with the frantic, naive logic of a woman trying to solve a crisis with her own body. She offers herself as the balm to his jagged temper, a sacrifice made in total ignorance of the monster standing before her. Chae-woo freezes. The request hits him like a physical blow, grounding his soaring rage in a sudden, sickening jolt of arousal. He is forced to retreat into the character of the husband once more, even as his own veins thrum with a violence that has nothing to do with love and everything to do with conquest. He pushes her away, his self-control hanging by a thread as thin as a razor wire, while he berates himself in the silence of his own mind. He is a wolf in the sheepfold, currently being offered the prize he did not expect to be handed so easily. As he listens to the water running behind the door, the final remnants of his patience begin to evaporate. The game of husband and wife is becoming an endurance test of the highest order, and every second she spends behind that door feels like the steady, rhythmic ticking of a bomb waiting for the final, inevitable strike. The bathroom door exhales a plume of mist, and Lee-yeon steps out, only to find the silence of the house amplified by his absence. The hunt for him is brief. She finds him upstairs, a striking, lethal silhouette in the low light of the nightstand. The transformation is absolute. The man she spent months nursing, the frail, drifting shadow, has been replaced by a creature of corded muscle, sharp angles, and a cold, predatory intent that makes the air feel heavy, almost electrified. As they stand together in the amber glow, the dynamic shifts from nursing to subjugation. When he reaches for her, his touch is not an invitation, it is a claim. The soft, hazel irises she once sought for comfort are now unreadable, hiding a reservoir of dark humor and profound, bitter alienation. He looks at her not with the affection of a husband, but with the clinical curiosity of a man dissecting a mystery he has finally decided to solve. The intimacy that follows is a study in dissonance. He is both her lover and her inquisitor, orchestrating a scene designed to peel back the layers of her innocence. There is no tenderness in his guidance, only the brutal, rhythmic efficiency of a man who has learned the anatomy of desire in the dark. He treats her senses as a map, charting every nerve with the same callous focus he once applied to the wiretaps and the cage. For Lee-yeon, it is a sensory surrender. She is caught in a tide of unfamiliar sensations, the musty, primal scent that fills her lungs, the overwhelming pressure, and the rhythmic, driving demand of his presence. She is lost in the mechanics of a hunger she does not fully understand, guided by a man who seems to be mocking his own past, even as he uses his body to rewrite the rules of their present. He watches her with a gaze that is stripped of empathy, a chilling contrast to the feverish moan that escapes his own lips. He is pushing her to the edges of her endurance, forcing her to confront a version of him that is all edge and appetite. Every movement is a lesson, and every gasp she exhales is a marker of his encroaching control. As the rhythm intensifies, the line between her past devotion and this new, terrifying reality blurs into nothingness. She is a woman bound to a stranger who wears her husband's face, and as she finds herself trapped in the deep, suffocating intensity of his command, she realizes that this is no longer a conversation between souls. It is a siege. And in the dark, rhythmic cadence of their breathing, the silence of the house holds its breath, waiting to see what remains of her when he is finally through. The memory of the night clings to Lee-yeon like a phantom, a suffocating, feverish sequence of movements that defy the logic of the life she thought they shared. The physical sensation, the pressure, the musty, metallic tang of conquest, lingers in her throat, a stark, visceral reminder that the man who now occupies her space is driven by forces far more jagged than affection. In the quiet of the morning, the transition from the brutal reality of his gaze to the mundane domesticity of the kitchen feels like a psychic fracture. She stumbles into the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs, searching for the anchor of his presence. There, Chae-woo stands, the picture of a doting husband, the rhythmic hiss of eggs in a frying pan masking the underlying dissonance of his demeanor. It is a performance of such high caliber that Lee-yeon, desperate for the life she once knew, begins to bend her own perception to fit the frame. She clings to the hope that the cruelty she endured in the dark was merely a bad dream, a byproduct of a trauma she alone is responsible for healing. But the mask he wears is translucent. As he speaks of his night, his voice is smooth, devoid of the jagged edges of his true temperament. He claims to have slept, to have found peace, yet his words are cryptic script he has penned specifically for her. He watches her with a detachment that borders on the predatory, his eyes scanning the remnants of her vulnerability, her swollen throat, her hesitant touch, with the cold, analytical interest of a scientist observing a specimen that has failed to perish. Behind the veil of his casual conversation, a different war rages. He does not need the respite of sleep. His body is an engine of endurance, tempered by a past that taught him how to exist in the spaces between human necessity. While Lee-yeon interprets his composure as recovery, he views it as a tactical advantage, a way to maintain the structural integrity of the trap. He watches her eat, her trust a fragile, brittle thing, and feels only the twist of his own stomach. The irony is a bitter pill he swallows alongside the morning air. She murmurs his name in her sleep, a name that belongs to the man who died in the void, not the one who now prepares her breakfast, and he has to physically restrain the instinct to recoil. He is playing the husband, but the role is a straitjacket, and his patience is a resource that is rapidly depleting. As the sun climbs higher, casting long, sharp shadows across the kitchen table, the silence stretches. Lee-yeon believes she has brought him back, that she has successfully nurtured the man she loved back into the light. She has no idea that the nightmares didn't move on to someone else. They simply took residence in the eyes of the person she just invited to sit down for a meal. The game is shifting, and the predator is finally setting the table for the next phase of his return. The morning light is a cruel exposure. It catches the contours of his face, the features she once memorized with a devotee's tenderness, now stripped of the warmth she desperately searches for. He watches her eat, his movements clinical, detached. The observation is not born of affection, but of a quiet, predatory assessment. She is a puzzle he is taking apart, piece by piece, noting the tremors in her hands and the flicker of suspicion in her gaze when he slips, using a hand that isn't his, manifesting a habit that belongs to someone else. She is a creature of habit, and he is a master of the mask, yet the friction between who he is and who she needs him to be creates a static in the air that is almost audible. He feeds her lies seasoned with the memories of a boy who watched her from a window 15 years ago. She thinks she is healing him. He knows he is simply waiting for her to fully step into the web. The arrival of the doctor brings only the cold, sharp scent of sterile concern, followed by the suffocating weight of secrets shared behind closed doors. Lee-yeon, relegated to the garden, digs into the earth with a frantic, rhythmic intensity. The soil beneath her fingernails is a distraction from the gnawing hunger in her gut, a hunger for a truth she is terrified to name. Then comes Ji-baek, the boy who sees the world through the lens of entomology, his eyes wide and vacant of childhood joy. His warning is a frantic, cryptic code, a parable of spiders and sacrifices, a desperate plea to avoid the trap that is already snapping shut. He is the canary in the coal mine, his voice a monotonous, high-pitched alarm that she tries to smother with common sense. But the predator has closed the distance. Chae-woo stands over them, his presence an absolute barrier, his silence more threatening than any shout. The authority in Lee-yeon's voice as she tries to shield the boy is a spark in the dark, a momentary defiance that he finds predictably amusing. He is a man carved from ice and iron, and he has nowhere to go but deeper into her life. The ringing of the phone cuts the tension like a guillotine. It is a lifeline, a call from the outside world that threatens to pull her away from his reach. But as the voice on the other end speaks of a cursed, snake-ridden tree, Lee-woo's focus remains anchored to the man in front of her. She doesn't see the insidiousness of his smile, nor does she realize that the trap hasn't just been set, it has already been sprung. He knows something about that tree. He knows why it matters. And as the call traps her in a web of her own professional obligations, he watches with the dark, patient anticipation of a man who has already planned the ending of her fairy tale. The air around the ancient ginkgo tree is thick with the scent of stagnant earth and hidden danger. It stands as a gargantuan relic, a natural monument housed within the artificial shell of a man-made mountain, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead feels dangerously thin. Lee-yeon moves toward it with a professional's obsession, but her senses are frayed, heightened by the unsettling, rhythmic pulse of Chae-woo's presence just behind her. When the serpent emerges, a sinuous, armored shadow with eyes like obsidian slits, it is an externalization of the dread she has been trying to bury. Its hiss is a sharp, jagged tear in the stillness. Yet, the moment Chae-woo's arm encircles her waist, the fear is eclipsed by a far more volatile sensation. His touch is not a comfort, it is a cold, calculated brand. It leaves a phantom impression on her skin that feels more invasive than the viper's venomous breath. She is trapped between the wild, honest danger of the snake and the unrecognizable, predatory warmth of the man she calls her husband. She justifies the snake's existence, calling it an adaptation, a necessity for a hollow tree to endure its own emptiness. But as she speaks, she is looking at Chae-woo, and her words feel like a confession. The tree, rotting from within, is a mirror, and she is beginning to realize that, like the ginkgo, she is simply accommodating a predator to avoid being truly alone. The scene shifts, the damp forest replaced by the sterile, flickering light of a computer monitor. The reality of a recent tragedy, a Boeing aircraft reduced to skeletal debris against the mountainside, washes over her. The images are a massacre of metal and biology, a reminder that destruction can fall from the sky with indifferent, chaotic force. As she processes the horror of the wreckage, Chae-woo's voice drifts from the next room, smooth and purposeful. It is a domestic sound, incongruous against the backdrop of death and disaster on her screen. She is momentarily split, half of her mind trying to process the wreckage of human lives, the other half trying to reconcile the man in the kitchen with the monster that whispers in her ear at night. She remains oblivious to the connection. The wreckage of the plane, the hollowed-out tree, the snake in the garden, and the man who has returned from a month-long silence, it is all part of the same ruinous geography. The smoke from the crash rises on the screen, a dark, drifting omen, while in the next room, the man who brought the darkness home hangs up the phone with a smile that never reaches his eyes. The trap is closing, and the mountain is beginning to groan under the weight of everything it has been forced to hold. The mountain that swallowed the aircraft remains a graveyard of splintered pine and scorched earth. For Lee-yeon, these mangled trees are not merely obstacles, they are the final, silent witnesses to a tragedy, and she feels the heavy, spiritual weight of their sacrifice. As she stares at the monitor, the screen serves as a window into a hellish landscape where the line between nature and disaster has been completely erased. She is a healer in a land of trauma, yet the most volatile presence is the one standing right behind her. Chae-woo, a man whose existence is now a riddle wrapped in the soft, deceptive skin of her missing husband, has infiltrated the very project meant to save these woods. He does not ask to accompany her, he orchestrates it. When he suggests sharing her quarters during their stay at the site, his tone is a blade disguised as silk. He holds her gaze with an intensity that strips her defenses bare, his eyes hollow yet piercing, as if he is reading the guilt she hasn't even had the chance to name yet. The arrival of the wildlife rescue team to oversee the tree doctors introduces a clinical, bureaucratic coldness to the operation. The criteria for success, leadership, cooperation, and sincerity, are merely words on a page, but in the shadow of the wreckage, they become survival traits. Chae-woo, however, is not playing by the rules of sincerity. He wanders through this catastrophe with an unnerving ease, his smirk a cryptic signal that he is not there to evaluate her performance, but to observe the slow, methodical unraveling of her world. Lee-yeon is caught in the crossfire of her own professional duty and a creeping, primal dread. She prides herself on the fundamentals, on the honest labor of healing, but Chae-woo's vague, taunting promises of favor suggest that the game is already rigged. He is a predator who has successfully embedded himself within her professional sphere, turning the recovery effort into a private stage for his own dark amusement. As Kwon Chae-woo debates the optics of the situation, The difference between being a worker and a politician in the heat of a crisis, Lee-yeon feels the walls of her own logic closing in. She believes she can win this by keeping her head down, by letting her work speak for itself. She does not see that Chae-woo is not watching her work, he is watching her reaction to the ruin. He is the shadow in the corner of her vision, the unexpected guest in her bed, and now, the arbiter of her success. As they prepare to venture into the blackened, debris-strewn heart of the mountain, Lee-yeon takes one last, lingering look at the monitor. The scorched pines on the screen seem to be reaching out, their broken limbs clawing at the sky. She is walking into a trap, and for the first time, she can smell the smoke on his skin. The air in the room is heavy, saturated with the scent of unwashed soil and the unspoken tension of a game played in the dark. Lee-yeon lies motionless, her hands clamped to the edge of the blanket as if she is bracing against an incoming tide. Beside her, Chae-woo is a study in calculated motion, his presence both a comfort and a strangulation. He has proposed a theatre of shadows, a professional separation by day, a clandestine communion by night, and in the process, he has laid bare the hollow reality of the upcoming competition. He whispers of corruption and preordained failure with the clinical detachment of a man who has witnessed the rot of human institutions firsthand. To him, Lee-yeon's sincerity is a quaint, fatal flaw. He watches her struggle with the moral weight of her work, his eyes flicking over her features with a mixture of hunger and dark, creeping amusement. He is the architect of her anxiety, nudging her toward the cliff's edge while offering the safety of his embrace as the only shelter. When he moves to cup her face, the intimacy feels borrowed, a performance of affection that he performs with the weary expertise of an actor reciting a familiar, hateful script. He is fighting his own biology, the persistent, unwanted echoes of the man he has replaced, and the physical reaction of his body is a betrayal he greets with silent, burning fury. He is not a puppy seeking her affection, he is a predator bound by the habits of a ghost, and the cognitive dissonance is slowly eroding his composure. As Lee-yeon finally succumbs to sleep, her breathing deepening into the rhythmic cadence of the truly exhausted, Chae-woo remains wide awake. He stares into the suffocating darkness of the bedroom, his jaw tight, his pulse a frantic, discordant rhythm. He feels the phantom weight of her hand on his forearm, a connection that feels like a snare. The irony of her whispering his name in the silence of her dreams is a razor across his nerves. He is living a borrowed life in a body that feels like a straitjacket, counting down the hours until the mountain project concludes. His plan is a simple, lethal geometry: complete the week, maintain the facade, and vanish before the rot of this domestic illusion can claim him. But as he watches her slumber, he finds himself haunted by the frightening realization that the road he is walking, this well-polished, affectionate path, is becoming far more comfortable than he ever intended. He turns his face toward the window, the cold glass offering no relief from the heat of her skin beside him. The trap is no longer just for her. It is for them both, and the darkness outside is waiting for him to finish his part. The bus rattles toward the site of the wreckage, a metallic capsule transporting a collection of anxious experts and petty rivals. For Lee-yeon, the cramped aisle is a corridor of suffocating pressure. Behind her, the persistent, buzzing agitation of Director Park, a man whose fashion choices are as loud and transparent as his professional insecurities, serves as a constant, grating reminder of the politics she so despises. He is a scavenger of prestige, circling her with questions that dig like talons, desperate to uncover the secret to the sudden interest the wildlife rescue team has taken in her clinic. She retreats into the window seat, a small, fragile barrier against the world. Her true focus, however, is not on the winding road ahead, but on the man weaving through the crowd boarding the bus. Chae-woo stands amidst the other rescue workers like a monolith of indifference. In the blistering midsummer glare, where everyone else is glistening with the exertion of the heat, he remains chillingly immaculate. He is an anomaly, a creature of cold precision moving through a world of soft, sweating humanity. When their eyes finally lock, the briefest flicker of recognition passes between them, buried deep, before he pivots away. The performance is flawless. He sheds his jacket with the casual, athletic grace of a predator unburdening itself, and Lee-yeon feels the sudden, sharp vacuum left by his departure. It is the same man whose arm she inhabited only hours ago, yet in this public space, he has become a ghost, a stranger who refuses to acknowledge that he has ever known her touch. The psychological dissonance is a physical blow. She is tethered to him by the most intimate of secrets, yet he treats her with the chilling, flat-lined gaze of someone who has already crossed her off a list. Director Park's prodding, which once felt merely annoying, now sounds like static in the distance as Lee-yeon stares at the back of Chae-woo's head, a target she cannot reach. As the miles dissolve, he never looks back. He is a wall of broad shoulders and jet black hair, a silent observer in a bus full of chatter. The game they agreed to play, this charade of strangers, is unfolding exactly as he predicted, but for Lee-yeon, the reality of being ignored by the person who claims her in the dark is far more unsettling than she anticipated. She is caught in a trap of her own making, realizing too late that while she was trying to maintain her reputation in the light, he was already orchestrating the shadows. And as the mountain looms on the horizon, dark and scarred, the silence between them feels less like a distance and more like the beginning of an interrogation. The air on the mountainside is heavy, thick with the cloying, metallic tang of jet fuel and the suffocating debris of a life cut short. Lee-yeon moves through the wreckage with a desperate, surgical focus. She is cleaning a wound on the earth, treating the splintered pines as if they were fragile, living patients, while the soil beneath her fingernails turns a greasy, charcoal black. It is a grueling, visceral penance, and every cut she makes is a rhythmic attempt to quiet the chaos in her own mind. Nearby, Kwon Chae-woo's voice cuts through the haze, informal and blunt. She speaks of the 7-year itch, of the inevitable decay of domestic fervor, and the thought lands in Lee-yeon's chest like a stone. Is that what this distance is? Is this chilling, polished detachment simply the natural expiration of their devotion? Kwon Chae-woo's casual nihilism, the idea that love is merely a condition to be survived until the end, chills Lee-yeon more than the mountain wind. She finds herself wondering if she is merely a chore he has grown bored of maintaining. High above the scrub, unseen but omnipresent, Chae-woo watches. He is a predator observing his favorite specimen, tracking the way her movements contrast against the grey ruin of the landscape. He sees her struggling with the weight of the broken trees, a small, vibrant figure of earnest effort in a graveyard. When the others around him begin to praise her, their voices are background noise, easily discarded. When he speaks, his tone is a fracture in the air. He describes her beauty with a disturbing, clinical accuracy, recalling the image of her sleeping under a tree with the detached precision of a man recounting a crime scene. It is a memory that shouldn't belong to him, yet it spills out of his lips with haunting familiarity. The surrounding team members recoil, sensing the sudden drop in temperature, the unnatural sharpness of a man who seems to be speaking to a version of her that no longer exists, or perhaps a version of himself that is trying to claw its way back. The realization hits him like a physical blow. He sees the confusion on their faces and snaps back into his mask, the warmth in his eyes vanishing as if it were a trick of the light. He has revealed too much, left a fingerprint on the glass of his own deception. As he retreats into the silent, watchful rhythm of his duty, the woods seem to press closer, the broken pines whispering to each other of the stranger who wears the husband's face. He is not just observing the trees anymore. He is measuring the distance between who he is expected to be and the jagged, starving truth of what he has become. And somewhere, deep within the tangled roots and ash, the ground begins to shift. The lobby of the motel is a hive of exhausted souls, filled with the static of tired men in uniforms and the stale smell of desperation. Lee-yeon stands at the edge of this weary congregation, her own fatigue a heavy shroud, waiting for a signal from the man who has become the center of her gravity. She is checking her phone, reaching for the anchor of his existence, when the world tilts on its axis. A hand descends like a brand, locking onto the nape of her neck. The grip is familiar, a tactile relic from a nightmare she thought she had outrun. As she is jerked backward, the collar of her shirt tightening against her throat, she comes face to face with the architect of her childhood terror, her cousin, her half-brother, the living ghost of every secret she tried to bury. His eyes, bright with a mixture of malice and predatory delight, hold the same toxic heat she remembers from the playground. He is playing a role for an audience, shouting into his phone as if her presence is a trophy he has finally snagged in the wild. His words are serrated, designed to slice through the veneer of the life she has built, branding her an ingrate, a runaway, a shadow that should have stayed in the dark. The sting of his palm against her cheek is sharp, instantaneous, and metallic, the taste of blood on her tongue a bitter, grounding reality. The onlookers in the lobby are silhouettes, murmuring spectators to a private tragedy. They see a woman being accosted. They do not see the history of the slaughterhouse, the drug fields, and the blood-soaked earth that birthed the woman now standing before them. Her cousin, fueled by his own mediocrity and the emboldening anonymity of his uniform, continues his assault, convinced that his insults still have the power to break her. But he is wrong. As she tastes the blood, a cold, strange clarity settles over her. She has stared into the eyes of things far more lethal than this man. She has survived horrors that would have hollowed him out in seconds. Her fear has migrated. It no longer lives in the palms of her cousin. It lives in the quiet, unreadable gaze of the man she sleeps beside, the man who brushes her hair with hands that have crushed life with chilling ease. She stares at her cousin, her defiance a jagged, glittering thing. When she laughs, the sound is dry and hollow, cutting through the lobby's tension like a blade. She looks at him not with the trembling submission of a girl, but with the weary, dangerous insight of a woman who has walked through the fire and found it wanting. She stands tall, the heat of the second slap radiating across her face, yet she does not recoil. Her cousin stares at her, baffled by the lack of collapse, unaware that she is no longer afraid of his violence. She is waiting for the one person whose shadow has finally eclipsed her own. And in the silence that follows her sharp retort, the air in the lobby seems to drop a few degrees, as if something, or someone, has just stepped through the door. The lobby of the motel has transformed into an arena of exposure. The air is thick with the scent of recycled floor wax and the metallic tang of fresh blood on Lee-yeon's lip. Her cousin, a man whose existence is tethered to the wreckage of her own past, continues his erratic performance. He drags her toward the door, his fingers digging into her collar like talons, his voice a jagged saw cutting through the composure she has fought so hard to maintain. Then, the world shifts. The automatic doors slide open, and the figures in uniform enter. Among them, Chae-woo. At the sight of her, the swollen, bruised symmetry of her face, the evidence of violence etched into her skin, his entire posture undergoes a terrifying metamorphosis. The polite, detached mask he wears for the world cracks, and beneath it lies something primal and profoundly cold. He does not rush, he manifests, crossing the distance with the predatory grace of a creature that has been hunting. When his gaze falls upon the man holding his wife, the temperature in the room seems to drop to a point of physical pain. Lee-yeon is caught in a sickening vertigo. She is less concerned with her cousin's vitriol than she is with the gaze of the man she loves, a man who, until this moment, seemed to be moving through this world as a stranger to his own emotions. She has spent her life perfecting the art of disappearing, of tucking her trauma into the folds of her professional life. But now, the secrets of her lineage are being broadcasted to the very people she most fears to disappoint. The confrontation is swift, brutal, and devoid of performative mercy. Chae-woo does not engage in a war of words. He exerts pressure, his hand closing over her cousin's head with the finality of an executioner. The sound of the man hitting the floor is wet and heavy, a stark contrast to the hollow, echoing accusations that follow. As her cousin scrambles on the ground, spitting out vitriol and the history of a family rot that has haunted her since birth, the lobby falls into an uncomfortable, rapt silence. The man rants about mental illness, about ruined lives, about the perceived injustice of Lee-yeon finding a sanctuary she does not deserve. Every word is a stone cast into the pond of her carefully curated life, ripples of judgment radiating from the curious onlookers. Lee-yeon feels the heat of the gaze of Chae-woo's colleagues. She is being stripped bare, her history laid out in the crudest of terms. She watches Chae-woo from the periphery, noting the way he signals to those hidden in the crowd. He is not just a protector, he is an observer, a man who is processing the ugly, jagged debris of her past with a clinical intensity that is arguably more terrifying than her cousin's rage. The nightmare is no longer contained within the walls of her own mind. It is out in the open, breathing, bleeding, and screaming at the top of its lungs. She has always feared that if the world saw the rot beneath her surface, they would turn away. Now, she is forced to watch as Chae-woo stares into the abyss of her history, his expression unreadable, his next move a mystery she is terrified to solve. The lobby has become a theater of the grotesque, a place where the thin veil of social order is being shredded by the raw, jagged edges of a shared history. Lee-yeon's cousin, a creature fueled by the venom of his own bitterness, continues to broadcast the misery of their lineage to anyone within earshot. Each word he spits is a calculated assault, a desperate attempt to paint Lee-yeon as a thief of happiness, a parasite thriving on the bones of their ruined family. When Lee-yeon scrambles to silence him, her hands trembling over his mouth, she is not trying to protect herself. She is trying to shield the man standing before her, the man whose reputation she fears will be tainted by the filth of her origin. But her effort is a futile gesture against a tide already rising. Chae-woo is no longer a man. He is a force of nature, chillingly indifferent to the rules of civility. The rhythmic, sickening thud of his boot against her cousin's skull serves as a metronome for the terror blooming in the room. He demands her definition, his eyes locked onto hers with a hunger that transcends the physical. He is forcing her to claim him, to anchor herself to him amidst the wreckage of her own social standing. When he pulls her head into his shoulder, the world vanishes. His strength is a cage, his scent, a cocktail of heat and adrenaline, filling her senses, overwhelming the bitter copper tang of the room. He is drowning out the whispers of the spectators, the judgmental eyes of her colleagues, and the hysterical, trailing cries of her cousin as he is dragged away like garbage. Every step Chae-woo takes toward the elevator vibrates through her own frame. She can feel his pulse against her neck, a rapid, frantic rhythm that mirrors her own internal combustion. He does not care about the hospital bills, the familial trauma, or the accusations of theft. He is moving with the singular, terrifying focus of a predator securing his prize. As they retreat into the quiet, clinical space of the elevator, the shouting of her cousin fades into a dull, distant ache. Dong-amai and the others are left in the wake of the silence, watching the doors slide shut on a mystery they will never solve. Lee-yeon is trapped in the crushing embrace of a man who has decided she belongs to him, completely and utterly. He keeps his hand firmly against the back of her head, a physical command that she keep her eyes averted from the world they are leaving behind. The elevator begins its slow, mechanical ascent, and the air between them thickens. He hasn't asked for an apology, nor an explanation. He has simply claimed her silence. As the floor indicator ticks upward, Lee-yeon realizes she has been removed from the light of scrutiny and dropped into a much deeper, much darker space, where the only thing that matters is the pulse pounding against her skin. The door clicks shut, sealing them in. The hotel room is a vacuum, a stark, airless space where the noise of the outside world is replaced by the deafening sound of a crumbling facade. Chae-woo doesn't hesitate. He pins her against the wall with the weight of his entire frame, the collision jarring the breath from her lungs. He is vibrating with a volatile, animalistic fury, his teeth grinding as if he is trying to pulverize the very air that stands between them. To him, her attempt to disown him in the lobby is not an act of nobility. It is a declaration of war against his ownership. Lee-yeon is trembling, a fragile thing caught in the storm of his agitation. She tries to explain, her voice a thin thread of logic woven through the chaos of her tears. She speaks of reputation, of the social leprosy that clings to her illegitimate birth, of the desire to keep his name unblemished by the rot of her history. She is a woman who has spent her life being taught that she is a defect, and she is merely trying to keep that defect from spreading to the only person who has ever offered her a semblance of protection. Chae-woo stares at her, his expression a fractured mosaic of possessive rage and something far darker, something that borders on a hungry, sadistic fascination. He traces the bruises on her cheek, his touch heavy and deliberate, a silent inventory of the damage inflicted by another man. The sting of his palm against her bruised lip is an electric reminder of her vulnerability. He tells her, with a voice as cold as glacial ice, that he does not want her sacrifice, nor does he want her protection. He wants only her absolute, unwavering submission to him, and him alone. But Lee-yeon, in a sudden, sharp reversal, finds her spine. She refuses to apologize for her existence or her choice to shield him. She stands firm in the wreckage of her own pride, declaring that she would repeat her choice 1,000 times over. It is a defiance that hits Chae-woo with the force of a physical blow. He is disgusted by her resolve, yet simultaneously ignited by it, his possessiveness curdling into a desperate, carnal obsession. He wants to reach into her world and leave his own marks, scars that are entirely his, deep enough to eclipse the shadows of her past. The air in the room thickens, becoming saturated with the scent of ozone and burgeoning, desperate intimacy. He tilts her chin upward, his thumb pressing against the line of her jaw, forcing her to confront the predatory light in his eyes. He speaks then, his voice a low, gravelly promise of total reclamation. He dismisses the history that has haunted her for years as if it were nothing more than a footnote, a triviality that his presence has rendered obsolete. He is demanding a communion that goes beyond the physical, a deep, invasive anchoring of himself within her. As he speaks of burying himself within her, of surrendering to the madness of their connection, Lee-yeon feels the walls of her own resolve beginning to liquefy. The fear is still there, but it is being overwhelmed by a dark, magnetic pull that threatens to consume them both. He leans closer, his shadow falling over her, the room shrinking until there is nothing left in existence but the rapid, frantic drumming of two hearts caught in a trap of their own making. The motel room has shrunk to a singular point of intensity, the air vibrating with the friction of two lives colliding. Chae-woo's restraint, once a carefully calibrated machine, has finally stalled, replaced by a raw, unvarnished hunger. When his hand grips the nape of her neck, it is not an act of tenderness. It is a claim, pulling her into a kiss that tastes of desperation and dormant, violent longing. Their movements are a tangled, uncoordinated dance of survival. He navigates her mouth with a possessive, invasive rhythm that forces her to tilt back, to yield, to surrender the oxygen in her lungs. He is drinking in the sounds of her, a symphony of soft, honeyed moans that defy his clinical precision. Every touch of his tongue is a question he doesn't want answered, a search for ghosts of other men he fears have touched her before. The suspicion gnaws at him, a dark, hidden vein of jealousy that makes his pulse hammer against his skin, frantic and discordant. He is a man living a lie that has begun to consume the truth. He tells himself this is a performance, a strategic masquerade until the moment he can vanish, but the heat of her skin, the way she clings to him, the absolute, trembling vulnerability she displays is carving a permanent hollow in his chest. The boundary between the actor and the man he is pretending to be has dissolved entirely, leaving only this frantic, sweating reality. With a sudden, sharp sound, the fabric of her clothing gives way, torn asunder like the fragile walls of her composure. He lifts her, his strength effortless, pinning her against the unforgiving surface of the wall. He is a predator who has found his territory, and he explores it with a devastating, methodical intensity. When he moves, his touch is both a caress and a scar, leaving the imprint of his desire on every inch of her. She tries to pull back, to regain some semblance of the woman who hides her pain, but he is relentless, his mouth a searing brand against her skin, drawing out a reaction she can no longer suppress. The more she trembles, the more he hardens, his own body a testament to the fact that he has crossed the line from observation to total obsession. The room is suffocating with the scent of their exertion, a musk of heat and salt that clings to the air. He presses into her, a weight that is both a comfort and a crushing demand. She is a woman who has known only how to hide, and he is the man who has decided to strip her down until there is nowhere left for her secrets to reside. He whispers into the crook of her neck, his voice a jagged edge that cuts through the haze of her pleasure, reminding her that there is no going back. As he unfastens his own restraints, the final barrier between their worlds vanishes. There is no more past, no more family, no more shame, only the relentless, driving cadence of their bodies searching for an end to the distance. And in the silence that follows the tearing of fabric, a new, far more dangerous game begins. The bathroom walls close in, slick with steam and the frantic, rhythmic spray of the shower. The air is heavy, vibrating with the sharp, clinical sound of water hitting tiles and the far more jagged, human sounds of surrender. Chae-woo has moved past the pretense of patience. He is a force of nature, determined to scour away the residue of the day, leaving nothing behind but the raw, exposed nerves of his wife. Lee-yeon stands caught in the deluge, her senses overwhelmed. The water, transitioning from a punishing, cold bite to a searing, luxurious warmth, clings to her skin, turning her clothes into a translucent, second skin. Every time she tries to shrink away, to hide in the corners of her own shame, Chae-woo is there, anchoring her, his movements methodical and devastatingly thorough. He is not merely washing her, he is laying claim to every inch of her existence, mapping her body with the possessive curiosity of a man who has finally found the center of his own obsession. When he drops to his knees, the shift in power is absolute. The world shrinks to the point of contact, where his breath, hot and humid, meets the most hidden, vulnerable part of her. The sensations are dizzying, the flick of his tongue, the rhythmic pressure of his mouth, the way he consumes her as if she were sustenance he has been denied for an eternity. It is a terrifying intimacy, a stripping away of the last defenses she had managed to hold on to. Her protests die in her throat, replaced by a wet, desperate cadence of breath and sound that echoes off the tiled surfaces. She tries to find a footing on the slippery floor, but he holds her fast, his hands firm against her skin, leaving bruised reminders of his grip. He is relentless, exploring the wet, inner architecture of her body with a hunger that feels both ancient and entirely, disturbingly new. The transition to his touch is seamless, the slide of his fingers, slick with her own essence, pushing deeper than she thought possible, stretching her until the distinction between pain and ecstasy blurs into a singular, overwhelming reality. Every time he pulls back, every time he whispers, his voice is a low, gravelly vibration that shatters her composure. Then, the finality of his entry hits her, a surge of heat, thick and demanding, as he fills the hollow space inside her. She is pinned, her back to the wall, her head tilted up to catch a breath that refuses to come. He wraps a hand around her throat, a gesture that is as much an embrace as it is a warning. In the reflection of the mirror, she sees two ghosts, one, a man who has abandoned all pretense of being a stranger, and the other, a woman who has finally stopped running. As the water cascades around them, masking the sounds of their union, the last remnants of her past are washed down the drain, leaving her with only the terrifying, pulse-pounding certainty of his possession. He leans into her ear, his heartbeat a drum in the silence between the falling water, and the question he asks is not a plea, but a demand that she has no choice but to answer. The bathroom is a sanctuary of steam and ruin, where the harsh tiles have become the only witness to a collision that defies simple definition. Lee-yeon is pinned, a captive of both the wall and the relentless man who has dismantled her defenses. Each movement he makes is heavy with a possessive, almost suffocating gravity, a cadence that forces her to abandon the scattered pieces of her composure. He moves with a rhythm that feels less like an embrace and more like a permanent staking of his claim, his body a hot, unavoidable pressure against her own. He taunts her, his voice a low, gravelly vibration against the sensitive shell of her ear. He questions her resolve, his thrusts punctuating his words with a cruel, rhythmic certainty. He isn't just looking for pleasure, he is looking for an admission, a crack in the armor she wears against the world. When he forces a kiss, his tongue invading with a predatory, starving insistence, the world outside, the motel, the secrets, the haunting specter of their past, dissolves into the heat of their friction. A shockwave ripples through Lee-yeon's frame when his hand finds her, a merciless, deliberate touch that threatens to tear her apart. It is a dual agony of sensation and emotion. She is being pulled toward a precipice, a place where her body is no longer hers to command. The taste of blood, copper, and sharp on her tongue is the only anchor in a storm of spiraling, frantic nerve endings. He seems to feed on her exhaustion, her tears, and the very scent of her surrender. In the midst of the crescendo, a memory flickers in the periphery of Chae-woo's consciousness, a whisper, a plea from a version of himself that feels like a stranger. The sudden intrusion of that voice, a haunting, distant promise regarding the return of memories he has long since buried, causes his pulse to stutter. The sharp, internal recoil is visceral. It is a ghost of a man he is no longer sure he wants to be, a man capable of promises he now fears to keep. He shakes the thought away, turning the violence of his focus back onto the woman beneath him. He pushes into her with a final, desperate sharpness, as if trying to bury that fleeting memory deep within the heat of their union. The disconnect between his physical hunger and the encroaching shadow of his former life is a jagged divide he refuses to cross. As the climax crests, washing over them with the force of an unbidden, overwhelming tide, he holds her as if she were a bridge to a sanity he has already forfeited. The air is heavy with the aftermath of their collision, a silence so profound it seems to vibrate. He leans his forehead against the slick, cold wall, his breathing ragged, his eyes darkened by a sudden, terrifying clarity. The past is a predator circling the perimeter, but for this moment, he has retreated into the one place where he can pretend he is the only ghost left in her world. Yet, as he pulls away, the weight of what he has pushed aside hangs between them, a silent, mounting threat that the darkness is only waiting for the lights to go out. The transition from the intimacy of the hotel room to the cold reality of the morning is jarring. The room is a sanctuary of silence, leaving behind only the antiseptic scent of medication and the heavy, lingering weight of a robe that feels like a shroud. Chae-woo is gone, his absence a hollow space where his intensity used to be. Lee-yeon moves through the motions of her day with the sluggish grace of a ghost, the echoes of the previous night's unraveling still vibrating beneath her skin. There is a fracture in her world that no amount of routine can bridge. The judgment of others, the whispers that likely follow her like a malodorous fog after the spectacle in the lobby, are nothing compared to the internal debris of her own history. She is a woman walking through a landscape of her own making, trying to keep the shadows from catching up. Meanwhile, in a desolate corner of the world, a different kind of ending has played out. The ground has been turned, and the pride of a man who once acted with casual cruelty has been buried in the dark, acidic soil of consequence. Chae-woo's work is done with the clinical detachment of a musician tuning an instrument. He has not merely defeated his target, he has haunted him. The threat he leaves behind, a shadow that will follow the cousin through every milestone of a life he no longer owns, is a far more elegant, agonizing torture than a simple grave. It is a promise of permanent observation, a tether of fear that will never be severed. The contrast is as sharp as a razor's edge. While Lee-yeon attempts to bury herself in the mundane rigor of her professional life, the man she sleeps beside is architecting a lifetime of psychological imprisonment for those who dared to touch her. As Lee-yeon arrives at the judging venue, the air is thick with the mundane indifference of her peers. Director Park's casual, careless flick of a cigarette but against the pavement is a tiny, localized eruption of the very disorder she is trying to escape. Her reaction, the rigid, biting correction, is a desperate attempt to assert control over a world that feels increasingly like a landfill of human debris. She stands on the threshold of a judgment she is not prepared to give, her head throbbing with the secrets of the night. She does not know that the man who held her, who consumed her, who promised to be her shadow, is currently ensuring that her past can never reach out to touch her again. She is safe, she is guarded, and she is utterly, terrifyingly alone. As she turns to face the day, the question remains. Does she truly want to know how deep the shadow stretches, or is the silence of the room and the weight of the robe the only comfort she has left to hold? The air on the mountainside is heavy, thick with the scent of pine and a brewing, suffocating tension. Lee-yeon sits perched upon a jagged rock, her nerves frayed like a wire holding too much current. The landscape before her is a scar on the earth, dug up, trashed, a reflection of the chaos she feels blooming within her own chest. When the tall, imposing shadow of Chae-woo emerges from the trees, the atmosphere shifts from uneasy to predatory. He carries a scythe, its curved blade glinting with a lethal, silver coldness that matches his expression. He is poised, his demeanor unnervingly precise, but beneath the surface, there is a tremor of something far more volatile. The conversation begins like a slow-moving landslide. He wants the truth, a currency she has spent her entire life hoarding. She offers him a story, a sanitized version of her past, but he sees through the artifice with the ease of a man who has spent a lifetime dissecting secrets. As she recounts the tale of the woman she once helped, the woman who left a legacy of blood money, the air turns frigid. He knows the weight of that money. He knows the cost of the life she bought for her uncle, a cost paid in the currency of someone else's existence. When she confesses, the admission hangs in the air like smoke. She chose family over morality, a desperate gamble that saved one life and erased another. Chae-woo's reaction is not one of anger, but a hollow, bone-chilling amusement. The realization hits them both. Their lives were intertwined long before they ever met, bound by the cruel, calculated indifference of the woman she sold. He stands before her, the scythe embedded in the bark of a nearby tree, his face a fractured mirror reflecting a man balanced on the precipice between weeping and madness. He leaves her with the weight of the truth, a burden heavier than any secret she has ever carried. And then, the silence is shattered. A violent, rhythmic percussion of fire erupts, tearing through the quiet of the forest. The ground trembles. The air is suddenly consumed by a roaring, hungry heat, the sound of an explosion that echoes the collapse of their fragile, twisted reality. Smoke billows, curling around her like desperate, grasping fingers. She looks for him, for the man who was just here, but he has vanished into the inferno. Another blast tears through the landscape, closer this time, throwing the world into a chaotic, blinding orange light. She is trapped in the center of a burning memory, with the man who knows her darkest sin, the man who might have just set the world on fire to keep her in it. The forest is screaming, and in the heart of the smoke, she realizes the game has changed. The hunter has revealed his hand, and the flames are only the beginning. The world returns in fragments, a sharp, shrill ringing that needles the brain, followed by the blurred, smudged watercolors of a tent interior. Lee-yeon's breath comes in jagged, uneven gasps, each inhale a struggle against the heavy, static air of the makeshift infirmary. The sharp sting of saline against raw skin is the only thing tethering her to the present, a biting reminder that she is alive, even if every nerve ending feels shredded. Then, the flap of the tent shifts, and he is there. Chae-woo. He looks exactly as he did before the world tore itself apart, composed, pristine, his face a mask of practiced concern that feels like a shroud. To the paramedics, he is a hero, a savior who arrived in the nick of time, a guardian angel who snatched her from the jaws of a man-made inferno. But to Lee-yeon, his presence is a suffocating weight. As he approaches, the air in the room seems to lose its oxygen. He takes the saline from the paramedic, his fingers, cool and deliberate, wrapping around her hand. It is an act of possession disguised as care. His nails press into the back of her skin, a subtle, bruising promise that he is holding the leash, and she is the one tethered to it. He speaks of the fire with the detached satisfaction of a conductor discussing a symphony. He recounts the near-miss as if he were a bystander, his tone innocent, his gaze mocking the very truth that hangs heavy between them. He is performing his role perfectly, weaving a narrative of heroic intervention while his eyes hold a cold, impenetrable darkness that defies the frantic noise of the medical staff. He leans in, his shadow eclipsing the light of the tent, and the temperature seems to plummet. The whisper he shares is not for the living. It is a dark, intimate secret that freezes her blood. He speaks of her professional triumph, of the accident he clearly engineered, framing her peril as a strategic success. Every syllable is a cold blade against her ear, a reminder that her safety is entirely contingent upon his whims. The arrival of the others, the sudden, chaotic influx of noise and concern, is a reprieve, yet it feels like a dream. Lee-yeon is trapped in a reality where her savior is her architect, where every word spoken in her defense is a brick in the prison he is constructing around her life. As she looks at him, the man who burned a forest to ensure he held the only remaining piece of her, she realizes that the fire didn't end on the mountain. It has simply moved inside, and the embers are beginning to glow. The tea table in the shade offers a fragile, deceptive normalcy. The clinking of ice against glass, the gentle hum of a Sunday afternoon, and the bright, unyielding sun, all of it feels like a stage set constructed to hide the rot beneath the floorboards. Lee-yeon sits across from Dong-am, her hands wrapped around the sweating tumbler, trying to anchor herself in the cold condensation, even as her world threatens to liquefy. Dong-am is fraying at the edges, a stark departure from her usual brittle composure. Her confession starts as a disjointed lament, the rambling anxieties of a woman unsure of her own sanity, before it shifts into something colder, something jagged. As she speaks of her lover, the narrative unravels into a confession of a nightmare witnessed in the shadows of the mountainside. Lee-yeon's heart hammers against her ribs, a frantic, discordant rhythm. The name of the man Dong-am describes, the one she saw committing a horror that defies common morality, is an echo of Lee-yeon's own private terror. When Dong-am finally names the victim, the connection snaps into place with the finality of a lock engaging. It is not just a stranger caught in the crosshairs of a madman, it is the Godzilla-like presence of her own cousin. The realization hangs in the stifling air, poisoning the sweetness of the afternoon. Lee-yeon feels the walls of her own carefully cultivated ignorance collapsing. She had been clinging to the idea that her husband was a savior, a flawed but protective force, but the truth is a mirror she can no longer avoid. If the man Dong-am saw is the same man who holds Lee-yeon at night, if the hands that soothe her are the same hands that shove bodies into the earth, then she is not living in a marriage. She is living in the center of a predator's territory. The iced tea is bitter, leaving a metallic tang on her tongue. Her friend's eyes, wide and searching, are filled with a desperate, unspoken plea for clarity, for a way to reconcile the man she desires with the monster she saw. Lee-yeon cannot offer her that mercy. She cannot offer her anything at all. As Dong-am stares at her, awaiting a reaction, a hollow wind seems to blow through the yard, cold enough to freeze the breath in Lee-yeon's lungs. She looks past her friend, across the yard, toward the house, empty now, yet somehow crowded with the weight of the man who has returned from his shopping trip to reclaim his bride. The silence stretches, tight and lethal, and for the first time, Lee-yeon realizes that the nightmare in the mountains was not an event to be recovered from. It was an initiation. She sets her glass down with a soft, final click. The sun feels less like warmth now and more like a spotlight, and the shadow she thought was her husband is suddenly, terrifyingly, everywhere. The tea in the glass remains untouched, its ice long since melted into a tepid, diluted pool. Between the two women, the air has grown thick with the unspoken. Dong-am's revelation, that her mysterious lover is the same shadow Lee-yeon has been trying to outrun, is a stone dropped into a deep, dark well, the ripples threatening to dismantle the fragile reality they have built. Lee-yeon feels the walls of her own life narrowing, the domestic comfort of her garden now feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a carefully manicured burial plot. When Dong-am pleads for guidance, her voice trembling with the realization that she has been intimate with a void, Lee-yeon finds herself speaking in riddles. She speaks of her trees, of the stubborn, patient care required to nurture something that might eventually turn against her. It is an admission she cannot fully voice, a confession wrapped in the metaphor of a botanist who refuses to abandon a dying specimen. But Dong-am's rejoinder, that some ends are fixed, that growth only leads to an inevitable, agonizing severance, strikes like a physical blow, leaving Lee-yeon reeling, unable to blink or breathe. The shift in the evening is abrupt. Nightfall brings the return of the master of the house. Chae-woo lounges, a silhouette cast in the rhythmic, flickering glow of the television. The screen's strobe-like pulses turn his skin a sickly, shifting hue, first a ghostly blue, then an angry, bruised red. He is watching her, his focus a tangible weight that makes the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. He is not a man who accepts redirection, and he is certainly not a man who permits secrets to flourish in his presence. When he questions her, his voice is layered with a dangerous, simmering restraint. He tracks the glow of her phone screen as if it were a target. Lee-yeon keeps her answers brittle and hollow, a performance of domestic indifference that she hopes will camouflage the panic spiking in her veins. But then he moves. It is an instinctual, territorial reach, a shadow stretching out to claim its prize. Lee-yeon flinches, an involuntary reflex of the hunted, and pulls her hand away before he can bridge the distance. The movement is small, a mere flicker in the dim room, but it hangs in the air, charged with the weight of her sudden, electric fear. Chae-woo stops, his hands suspended in the dark, the silence between them no longer a shroud, but a jagged, open wound. He looks at her, and in the alternating light of the screen, his expression is unreadable, waiting to see if she will retreat further, or if the hunt has finally entered its final phase. The living room air had thickened, becoming heavy with the scent of unspoken threats and the jagged rhythm of a fraying domesticity. Lee-yeon's clumsy attempt to pass off a flinch as a reaction to an insect had failed, leaving a brittle silence that tasted like copper. Chae-woo's mask of calm was a masterpiece of control, yet his eyes were anything but serene. As he questioned her upcoming venture, the botanical guidework she had accepted as a desperate lifeline to the outside world, his voice was an undulating wave, drawing her in only to reveal the razor-sharp rocks just beneath the surface. When her phone vibrated, slicing through the tension, Lee-yeon grabbed it with the frantic instinct of a drowning woman reaching for a rope. The caller was a stranger, a student, yet to Chae-woo, it was a transgression. He watched her pace the floor, his eyes tracing the movement of her throat as she spoke, his fingers drumming a restless, predatory tempo against his thigh. He was not merely observing, he was cataloguing her every hesitation, every soft laugh, every breath that wasn't meant for him. The television clicked off, plunging the room into a sudden, suffocating quiet that made the sound of their own breathing seem deafening. He leaned back, his posture loose, almost predatory, his gaze following her with the intensity of an apex predator tracking prey in the tall grass. Then, the conversation veered into territory that left Lee-yeon paralyzed. He pointed out his state of physical arousal with a chillingly casual air, weaving a narrative that conflated desire with the cold, hard reality of weapons and blood. It was a veiled warning, a performance of dominance that stripped away the last of her defenses. He spoke of hunger, not for intimacy, but for the thrill of the hunt, his words dripping with a dark, twisted flotation that felt more like a cage closing. Lee-yeon's skin crawled, her body vibrating with a primal urge to flee, to bolt through the door and never look back at the man who seemed to find pleasure in the very terror he instilled. With a stammered, breathless excuse, she retreated, the lock on her office door clicking shut like the final turn of a bolt in a prison cell. She was safe for the moment, encased behind wood and metal, but as she leaned against the door, heart hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm, she knew the truth. Outside, in the dim, cooling air of the living room, the man she had married sat in the dark, watching the door. The ice in his eyes had settled deep, and he was no longer waiting for her to come out, he was simply waiting for the right moment to come in. The sunlight on Hwaido filters through the canopy in dappled, shifting patterns, yet the warmth feels brittle, almost fragile. Lee-yeon stands before the ancient, tax-paying pine, its bark a history book of resilience, while her students gather around, eyes bright with the genuine hunger of youth. She speaks of legacy, of a tree that owns the very earth beneath its roots, a creature of permanence in a world that feels increasingly transient. It is a beautiful, scholarly distraction, a professional mask she wears to keep the trembling of her jaw from betraying the terror currently clawing at her throat. Because he is there. He is not a student, though he dresses the part, blending into the periphery like a shadow that has learned to wear denim and cotton. Kwon Chae-woo stands just beyond the reach of her lecture, his presence a low-frequency hum that vibrates against her ribs. He is the static in her signal, the silence that screams. She remembers the night before, the way he had waited in the dark like a predatory sentinel, his stillness a testament to a patience that is not merely human, but geologic. He hadn't asked for permission to exist in her space, he simply took it, and now, he stalks the edges of her professional life, an uninvited audience of one. The interruption comes not from him, but from the club president, a young man with clear, earnest eyes and a reverence that feels dangerously sweet. He speaks of her past, of the columns she once penned with the quiet, observant soul of a poet. He sees her, truly sees her, and for a fleeting, intoxicating moment, Lee-yeon feels the hum of human connection, the simple, quiet joy of being understood. But the sweetness is laced with a bitter aftertaste. As the boy talks, his admiration morphs into an awkward, fumbling intimacy, a tentative reach across the divide of age and profession. He asks the question that changes the light, that shifts the atmosphere from a scholarly excursion to a precipice. Do you have a boyfriend? The air freezes. The birds in the pines go silent. Lee-yeon's breath catches, not because of the boy's question, but because of the shift in the periphery. She doesn't have to turn her head to know that the shadow has moved. She can feel the sudden, drop-in-temperature gravity of Chae-woo's attention sharpening, focusing, closing the distance. The boy is asking about a relationship, unaware that he is actually inquiring about the ownership of a soul. Lee-yeon stares into the boy's hopeful, oblivious eyes, knowing that behind her, the hunter has heard every word. The forest is beautiful, but the trap is already sprung. The air in the forest suddenly loses its warmth, turning thin and sharp, like the edge of a blade pressed against the skin. The student's question, simple, innocent, born of a genuine curiosity, hangs in the air, a fragile balloon about to be pierced. Lee-yeon feels the shift before she sees it. A few yards away, Kwon Chae-woo stands amidst the ancient pines, his body coiled with a predatory tension that makes the very atmosphere buckle. His gaze, fixed on the young man's back, is not that of a bystander. It is the focused, unblinking stare of a creature deciding whether to let its prey live or to tear it asunder. The vibration against her skin is a command, a tether being jerked tight. She lifts the phone to her ear, and the voice on the other end is a low, jagged rasp, a whisper that bypasses her consciousness to claw directly at her nerves. He is dictating her reality, choreographing her responses as if she were a marionette whose strings are tangled in his iron grip. He demands the truth, or at least, his version of it. She speaks the words, her voice a hollow shell, devoid of the warmth that usually defines her. When the voice in her ear tries to force a grotesque, terrifying confession into her mouth, a claim about his penchant for collecting the remains of the dead, she recoils, a jolt of pure, visceral defiance surging through her blood. She kills the call, her hand shaking with a cocktail of fury and fear, while across the grove, Chae-woo merely shrugs, his face a mask of maddening, cool indifference. He is daring her to challenge him, waiting to see if she has the spine to sever the cord. The students, blissfully unaware that they are breathing the same air as a monster, continue their interrogation, weaving tales of ideal types and romantic destinies. Lee-yeon plays her part, wearing a smile that feels like a jagged scar across her face. She speaks of marriage as if it were a casual thing, a spontaneous collision of lives, while her soul feels like a dry leaf caught in a hurricane. Every word she utters is a betrayal of her own history, a lie built to protect the fragile pretense of a normal life. As she turns away, leading the group toward the next sentinel of the forest, the golden sunlight plays tricks on her vision, casting long, distorted shadows that seem to dance in her wake. She is walking forward, but she can feel the heavy, deliberate pace of the shadow behind her. She has claimed to be married, but the title feels less like a union and more like a brand, a permanent mark of ownership that she is forced to carry into the darkening woods. The dining room is a theater of quiet, jagged nerves. The sharp clink of silver against porcelain serves as the only heartbeat in the room, a rhythmic intrusion on a silence that is neither peaceful nor empty. Lee-yeon sits across from him, her attention scattered, her focus perpetually drifting toward the glow of her phone, while Kwon Chae-woo watches her with the intensity of a predator who has realized the meal is no longer interested in him. He gestures toward the washroom, his movements precise, a practiced display of domestic grace that feels entirely at odds with the darkness coiled beneath his skin. When he offers a foot rub, the suggestion is not a gentle act of intimacy, it is a claim. He reminds her of the closeness they have shared, of the physical proximity that binds them, yet his words leave an oily, lingering discomfort. He isn't offering service, he is asserting his reach. The tension explodes when she dares to favor her phone over his presence. He slams his chopsticks down, the vibration traveling through the tabletop and into her very bones. He is a man struggling to contain a torrential ego, his frustration bubbling up like black bile. He speaks of the meal he prepared, of the fish he caught, framing his labor as a sacrifice that demands total, soul-level submission. He wants to scream that he owns the horizon, that the mountains she walks are his inheritance, yet he checks himself. He swallows his arrogance, his jaw tightening into a line of lethal stone. Lee-yeon, perhaps emboldened by a desperate need to reclaim her own narrative, strikes back with cold, fiscal reality. She reminds him of the debts, the logistics, the mundane architecture of their life that keeps them grounded, a life she funds, a life he inhabits like a parasite. The atmosphere shifts. The air thickens with the weight of memory and mockery. He accuses her of changing, of losing the blinding, possessive adoration she once held for his simpler, earlier self. He mocks her independence, twisting the knife by questioning her loyalty and her focus, his words dripping with a contempt that is barely masked by his calm facade. He is two men fighting for the same space, the fool she once loved and the monster who has reclaimed his past, and he is agonizingly aware of the chasm between them. But then, he stumbles. In his rush to insult the youth and vitality of the man she was just speaking with, he inadvertently reminds her that he, too, is a younger man. The irony is a physical blow. He pales, the dark, predatory mask flickering and dying, leaving behind a moment of raw, ugly vulnerability. He chugs his water to drown the slip-up, his appetite gone, his pride wounded by his own tongue. He looks at her, really looks at her, and the air between them is suddenly heavy with the scent of unsaid things and the sour metallic taste of a game gone wrong. He is silent now, staring at the table, a man who has played his hand and realized that the cards have shifted, and the woman across from him is no longer the easy, doting prey he expected to find. The meal is over, but the hunger, the dark, insatiable kind, has only just begun. The hospital hallway is a corridor of sterile, white silence, but it holds no peace for Kwon Chae-woo. He grips the small, amber bottle of pills with white-knuckled intensity, his defiance of the doctor's warning echoing against the linoleum. He is a man running on the fumes of sheer, iron-willed wakefulness, his body a battlefield where his own biology has become the enemy. The phone against his ear is a lifeline to a shadow world. As he paces, the voice on the other end, Jang Beam-hee, offers the seduction of an exit strategy, a return to the status quo, an end to the agonizing charade in Hwaido. But Chae-woo is past the point of easy retreats. The sentimental tether that once bound him to Lee-yeon, the fragile hope that she might be the cure for the darkness in his mind, has snapped like a brittle twig. Every memory he recovers acts like acid, dissolving the romantic illusion and revealing the cold, strategic necessity of his presence. He is no longer playing the part of a love-struck husband. He is the hunting dog finally turning on his masters. The revelation of his mother's past, the trauma of being a survivor of the Kwon family's clandestine, grotesque pharmaceutical experiments, has transformed his existence into a singular, razor-sharp weapon. He is not here to be cured. He is here to dismantle the architecture of the power that crushed the woman who raised him. When Jang Beam-hee questions the cost of the charade, the toll it takes on his failing body, Chae-woo's response is devoid of mercy. He speaks of Lee-yeon not as a partner, but as an animal being led to the abattoir. He has observed the subtle discord in her gaze, the way her smile has become a thin, fractured mask over a growing awareness of the predator in her midst. He pauses, the sterile scent of sanitizing alcohol clinging to him like a shroud. He has spent years planning the dissolution of the family that defines him, and he has not waited this long to settle for tainted meat. The struggle, the fight, the gradual realization of the trap, it is merely the seasoning. He closes his eyes, his breathing steady, rhythmic, and terrifyingly cold. He will not let the beast win by exhaustion. He will savor the final act, for there is nothing quite as exquisite as the moment the prey finally understands that the door is bolted from the outside. The bedroom is a cavern of shadows, thick with the scent of unsaid things and the heavy, electric friction of a stalemate. Lee-yeon lies motionless, her eyes wide, tracing the unseen architecture of the ceiling, while beside her, Chae-woo is a dormant volcano, a presence of quiet intensity that threatens to erupt at the slightest provocation. His hand, warm and heavy, rests against her, a silent tether that refuses to let her drift into the sanctuary of sleep. She is playing a dangerous game of attrition. She fears the moment he closes his eyes, for she has learned that his slumber is the only time the predatory watchfulness in his gaze truly fades. To witness him asleep is to reclaim a moment of normalcy, a fleeting delusion that the man beside her is not a stranger with a hidden, violent history. He, however, is a man sustained by chemical stimulants and the sheer, brutal necessity of keeping watch. He sees through her performance of exhaustion, his patience wearing thin as he observes her desperate, stubborn wakefulness. The silence is punctuated by the rhythmic, intrusive glide of his hand. He begins to move with a calculated, invasive tenderness, lifting her clothing to map the soft, vulnerable terrain of her body. It is an exploration that balances on the knife edge between comfort and violation. When his touch finds the pulse of her sensitivity, a jolt of traitorous electricity shoots through her, a betrayal of her own nerves that she tries, with every fiber of her being, to suppress. She wants to be still, to be stone, to deny him the satisfaction of her body's involuntary response. He presses, he probes, and he teases, his movements a symphony of controlled pressure designed to shatter her resolve. Every gasp she swallows, every moan she bites back, only serves to ignite his possessiveness. He is drowning in a pathetic, agonizing inferiority, jealous of the version of himself she once embraced, the man who didn't carry the weight of recovered memories and blood-soaked secrets. He wonders, with a jagged, inward laugh, if she would still resist if it were the old Chae-woo, the foolish, unsuspecting boy she had initially claimed. She feigns sleep, her breath evening out in a rhythmic, artificial cadence, hoping to lull the hunter into leaving her be. It is a pathetic facade, thin as gauze, and he sees through it with sickening clarity. To him, Her attempt to escape via sleep is merely an invitation to press harder. As he slips deeper, pushing against the resistance of her body, he finds a dark, distorted joy in her struggle. The bedroom, once a place of rest, has become a space of exquisite psychological warfare, where the victim's only defense is to pretend she is already gone, and the hunter is determined to prove that she is, and always will be, completely, terrifyingly under his control. The bedroom has become an arena where intimacy is used as a weapon, a space where the air is thick with the scent of salt, heat, and the unspoken language of power. Chae-woo, a man inhabiting a skin that feels increasingly alien to him, operates with a cold, mechanical precision. His touch is no longer a conversation of shared desire, but an interrogation. He probes her, his fingers a relentless cadence against her most vulnerable points, while his eyes remain devoid of the warmth that once defined their union. He is a ghost haunting his own life, desperate to extract a name, a memory, or an admission that will bridge the widening chasm between who he was and the monster he has become. Lee-yeon is a masterpiece of stifled resistance. She bites her tongue, drawing the iron taste of blood to drown the betrayal of her own nerves. Her body reacts, the traitorous flaring of heat, the involuntary softening, even as her mind retreats into a fortress of silent, seething resentment. Every time he forces a response, he is not just claiming her body. He is attempting to rewrite the history of their connection, demanding to be recognized as her one and only, while his own hands move with the clinical detachment of a man performing an autopsy on his own marriage. The psychological tension is a physical weight, pinning her to the mattress. He mocks her sensitivities, twisting her discomfort into a mirror of his own insecurities. He is jealous of her past, jealous of her silence, and perhaps most of all, jealous of the version of himself that she once held in such high regard. He views her endurance not as patience, but as an insult. He forces her hand to serve him, a maneuver that feels less like a lover's game and more like a forced surrender of her autonomy. The friction is a burn, a blistering reminder of her powerlessness, yet even as his ragged, discordant moans fill the room, his eyes remain fixed on her with a predatory intensity. There is no tenderness in his gaze, only the triumph of a hunter who has cornered his quarry and finds it impossible to stop until the game is entirely consumed. When the release finally comes, it is a violent, draining affair that leaves Lee-yeon hollowed out, her senses fraying at the edges. The room is heavy with the aftermath, a suffocating humidity that clings to their skin. He pulls her close, his touch now an affectation of affection that carries the weight of a sentence. As he whispers a promise of sweet dreams into the crook of her neck, the irony is a poison. She is too exhausted to move, too broken to fight, and as the darkness settles, she realizes that the terror of his presence has not lessened. It has simply become the only reality left. The hunt is over for the night, but the predator is already looking forward to the dawn. The air on Hwaido Island is thick with the scent of pine needles and the promise of renewal. The forest, usually a sanctuary of silence, is today a cathedral of fluttering color. Thousands of swallowtail butterflies, bred for this moment of fragile beauty, erupt from an antique cage in a swirling vortex of iridescent wings. To the onlookers, it is a spectacle of nature's perfection. To Lee-yeon, it is a haunting, kaleidoscopic mirror of her own fractured reality. As the air fills with the rhythmic beating of delicate wings, she holds little Ju-baek's hand, his youthful chatter acting as a desperate tether to a normalcy she no longer truly possesses. He speaks of butterflies in terms of scientific precision, blissfully unaware of the darker instincts that govern the world of men. But Lee-yeon is haunted. Amidst the shimmering petals of light and insect life, the intrusive, jagged memories of the night before coil around her thoughts. She remembers the touch of a man who is becoming a stranger in her own home. She remembers the cruel, possessive whispers and the visceral weight of his demands. These memories pulse beneath her skin like a fever, contrasting sharply with the pristine, sunny grace of the festival. She has spent her days performing a delicate, dangerous dance of self-deception, choosing to bury the truth of his returning memories under the weight of her own desperate longing. She has convinced herself that if she simply ignores the shifts in his gaze, the coldness in his tone, and the predatory cadence of his movements, she can preserve the shell of their marriage. It is a delicious, rotting sort of madness. She tells herself that if she waits long enough, if she remains quiet and compliant, the storm will pass and the man she thought she knew will emerge from the cocoon of his own darkness. She is willing to be the architect of her own entrapment, painting over the cracks in their life with the bright, desperate colors of her own denial. Then, the wind shifts. The swarm of butterflies, erratic and wild, scatters in a sudden updraft, momentarily blinding her. She raises her arm in an instinctive gesture of defense, a reflex born of nights spent bracing for the inevitable. When she lowers her guard, the light seems to fracture. Standing amidst the swirling vortex of wings is Kwon Chae-woo. He is motionless, a pillar of shadow in the center of the frantic, golden light. He does not look like a husband watching a festival. He looks like a hunter who has finally cornered his prey in the middle of a crowded, sun-drenched field. Her feet turn to lead, her pulse hammering against her throat. The delusion of safety shatters instantly, replaced by the terrifying, crystal-clear realization that he is no longer pretending to be anyone but himself. And he has been waiting for her to notice. The festival grounds are a chaotic masterpiece of nature and artifice. Thousands of swallowtail butterflies are a living, breathing storm of color, a swirling vortex of fragile life that obscures the horizon. Amidst this kaleidoscope, he stands like a dark monolith, a man apart from the cheering crowds and the mechanical clicking of camera shutters. He is speaking into a walkie-talkie, his expression unreadable, his dark hair a stark, ink-colored river against the backdrop of fluttering wings. When their eyes lock across the divide, the noise of the world, the applause, the music, the laughter, simply evaporates. There is only the sudden, magnetic pull of the familiar. Lee-yeon moves without volition, abandoning the pretense of her duties to reach for the only anchor she has in a sea of beautiful uncertainty. When she collides with him, burying her face into his waist, the scent of him hits her like a physical blow, clean, refreshing, and deeply, intoxicatingly home. It is a moment of profound, dangerous surrender. She knows the man beneath the jersey, and she knows the monster he is becoming, yet she chooses the comfort of his embrace over the cold truth of her intuition. She clings to him, a desperate, silent plea for him to remain the man she crafted in her mind, even as he towers over her, a man whose memories are returning with the force of a tidal wave. He is meticulously attentive, his eyes tracing the line of her frame with a predatory precision that makes her skin prickle. When he speaks of her running toward him, his voice is layered with a dark, shimmering irony. He questions her willingness to stay, while she, in a sudden, vulnerable surge of honesty, confesses that she cherishes him more than the magnificent, fleeting nature around them. It is a vow whispered into the heart of a whirlwind, a desperate attempt to bind him to her side. For a heartbeat, his mask slips. The numbness that usually shields him from his own empathy cracks, his Adam's apple bobbing with the effort of holding back an answering tide. But then, a butterfly, an unbidden, delicate witness, lands on the bridge of her nose. The absurdity of the moment breaks the tension, and he leans in, his hand moving to stifle a laugh that never quite reaches his eyes. Instead of shooing the insect away, he closes the distance, his lips pressing against hers with a sudden, bruising intensity. It isn't a kiss of gentle affection. It is a collision of jagged needs. His hands lock onto her, his grip on her neck and cheek forceful, almost desperate, as if he is trying to extract something from her soul through the act of kissing. His breath is ragged, his movements frantic, a feverish attempt to silence the doubts, the memories, and the mounting threat of the truth. As they cling to each other amidst the thousands of wings, the forest feels less like a sanctuary and more like a stage for their unraveling, a place where the beautiful, fluttering life around them is merely a veil for the sharpening claws of their own inevitable destruction. The site of the landslide is no longer just a scar on the landscape. It is a graveyard of memories, still reeking of decay and wet earth. Lee-yeon stands amidst the sludge, her boots sinking into the remains of a forest that once breathed, now reduced to a stagnant swamp. Kwon Chae-woo's frustration is a sharp, buzzing irritation, a mirror to the swarming mosquitoes that plague them, but Lee-yeon's focus has shifted. She is no longer just a competitor fighting for a bid. She is a woman who has begun to glimpse a purpose beneath the muck. The competition is a cruel paradox. Restore a wasteland while under the scrutiny of the very people who lost everything to the mountain's collapse. Across the divide, the shadow of a prestigious landscaping firm looms, a polished, commercial force ready to slap a coat of floral paint over the tragedy, a superficial fix for a deep, systemic wound. They would build a garden, they would construct a stage. But Lee-yeon realizes that the residents of Hwaido do not need a wedding hall. They need a place to grieve, to heal, and to remember that life can still take root in broken ground. She rejects the hollow vanity of the aesthetic. Her ambition, once a quiet flicker, has been tempered into a hard, cold resolve. She doesn't want to mimic a forest, she wants to orchestrate a resurrection. As she grapples with the technical impossibility of the task, the pieces of her strategy begin to coalesce, a shift from the ornamental to the medicinal, from the visual to the visceral. The arrival of director Kwon Chae-woo breaks the tension with the oily grace of a man who plays games he expects to win. He is a predator in long boots, his presence a minor, irritating obstacle in the grander design of her intent. Yet, it is his offhand comment about Hwang Jo-yoon that leaves a lingering chill. A man has vanished from the board, discarded like a pawn, and Jo's dismissive, tight-lipped deflection speaks volumes of the rot hidden behind the corporate facade of D Hospital. Lee-yeon lets the question of the missing man go, not out of indifference, but because she understands that the true danger on this mountain is not just the shifting earth. She looks at the mud, the debris, and the hopeless expanse of the wasted forest, and she begins to see the architecture of her own victory. She will not hide the rot with expensive perfume. If the forest is to return, it must be an honest restoration, a raw, painful, and authentic path back to the roots of what was lost. The evaluation is no longer about winning a contract. It is a gamble on the sanity of the traumatized and the endurance of the land itself. As the wind kicks up, carrying the faint, metallic scent of something long buried, Lee-yeon takes a steadying breath. The game has changed, the players are shifting, and somewhere in the shadows of the valley, she suspects that some things, once buried, are beginning to stir. The encounter with Director Jo in the mudded wreckage of the forest feels less like a conversation and more like a warning shot. His mask of professional arrogance has slipped, replaced by the shivering, primal fear of a man who knows exactly what lurks in the deep end of the industry. He speaks of the Kwon family, the hidden masters behind the pharmaceutical giants, as if merely uttering the name could summon a reckoning. His advice is a chilling, imperative command. If the shadow of the Kwon name ever falls across her path, don't look, don't investigate, and for the love of all that is holy, just run. Lee-yeon is left with a hollow resonance in her chest, a feeling of being a small, naive player in a game whose rules are written in blood. She retreats to the sanctuary of her work, seeking solace in the only language she understands, the complex, wordless architecture of a forest restoration. She finds an old, dust-moted radio and a forgotten disc, Shostakovich. The cello's melody is a haunting, weeping thing, a sonic landscape of ruins and rebirth that mirrors her own desperate, internal struggle to heal the land. Then, the music is interrupted by the sharp, rhythmic rap of knuckles against the door. Chae-woo stands there, and the sight of him is a sudden, physical jolt. His complexion is the color of parchment, his eyes clouded with a frantic, sleepless exhaustion that he is failing to conceal. He stares at the radio as if it were a bomb, his jaw working with a suppressed, violent energy. When he asks about the music, his voice is not a question, it is a trigger. The melody deepens, the cello notes growing more insistent, more agonizingly familiar. Lee-yeon watches him with a growing, cold clarity. She notes his sudden, uncharacteristic agitation, the way he claws at his own brow, the way his hands tremble with a phantom pain. She realizes with a jolt of horror that the music, a piece of her own past, is acting as a skeleton key, unlocking something volatile within him. He isn't just listening to the music, he is being hollowed out by it. He laughs, but it is a jagged, ugly sound that scrapes against the air. He is a man balanced on the very edge of an abyss, his body pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance. When he finally begs her to stop the sound, his voice is strained, bordering on a plea for mercy. He covers his face with his palm, and in that fleeting gesture, Lee-yeon sees a flicker of the boy he was, hidden beneath the armor of the man he has become. The room is suffocating. The cello continues to moan, a dark, pulsing heartbeat of a secret that has been waiting years to be told. Chae-woo is trembling, his composure shattered, and as Lee-yeon reaches for the stop button, she realizes that the music was not the problem. The problem was the memory it forced him to face, and he is finally, terrifyingly, at his breaking point. The human spirit is a fragile instrument, susceptible to a slow, creeping petrification. Lee-yeon remembers this, the haunting image of a woman who stopped being a person and began to resemble a piece of timber. Yoon Ju-ha, once a vibrant soul, had withered into a mummified stillness, her eyes glazing over as if the very sap of her existence had been drained by the weight of her own history. Lee-yeon, then only a child herself, had acted as a desperate amateur botanist, attempting to graft hope onto a dying branch, whispering stories of spruce trees that bend toward the light to a woman who had already surrendered to the shadows. Back then, Lee-yeon had mistaken that slow descent into silence for a recovery. She had mistaken the woman's strange, whispered confessions about sacrifice and the shedding of branches as a sign of life, never realizing that they were actually the final, melodic notes of a funeral dirge. Now, the past is not merely a memory. It is a ghost that bleeds into the present, flickering through her mind in flashes of desiccated skin and desperate, clawing hands. The sound of shattering glass jolts her back to the kitchen, where the present reality is equally brittle. Kwon Chae-woo stands amidst the debris of a broken plate, his face a landscape of strain and hidden agony. He looks like a man who has been hollowed out from the inside, his movements shaky, his breath coming in jagged, wheezing hitches. He claims he hasn't been up long, but his eyes are dark pits of exhaustion, and the cold sweat beaded on his forehead speaks of a man nearing the end of his tether. He retreats to the shadows of the storage room, the darkness there offering a temporary veil for his physical collapse. He is drowning in the same symptoms that claimed the woman from Lee-yeon's past, a systemic, agonizing breakdown that he is desperately trying to mask. Every breath is a battle. Every second spent upright is an insult to his fraying nerves. He makes the call, his voice a low, strangled vibration against the receiver. There is no need for explanations. The man on the other end, Jang Beam-hee, understands the silence perfectly. The arrangements are being made. The charade is concluding. As Chae-woo leans against the cold wall, fighting the encroaching blackness that threatens to swallow his sight, he realizes the irony of his situation. He had sought to destroy the Kwon legacy from within, to act as a parasite on the house that ruined his mother, but he is the one being consumed. The night is a narrow, suffocating tunnel, and as he waits for the end of this sleepless vigil, he can almost hear the soft, rhythmic rustling of leaves, the sound of someone turning into a tree, a process that is finally, mercifully, reaching his own roots. The kitchen is quiet again, save for the rhythmic dripping of water and the shallow, labored hitching of his breath behind the door. Lee-yeon is just outside, still mourning a ghost she didn't know she was protecting, unaware that the predator she shares her home with is currently being dismantled by the very darkness he tried to harness. The final night has arrived, and the forest is finally reclaiming its own. The kitchen air is heavy with the scent of a burnt, disjointed morning. The food on the table is a culinary disaster, salt and sugar swapped in a blur of fatigue, a frantic attempt at domesticity by a man whose very cells are failing. Lee-yeon chews mechanically, forcing down the sickeningly saccharine and the aggressively saline, her smile a fragile, trembling mask. She is watching him, but her mind is trapped in the amber of a nightmare, the ghost of a woman who turned into wood, a memory that has begun to bleed into her waking life with an agonizing, tactile reality. She leaves for the mountain, clutching the promise of a gift, a performance that she hopes will act as a bridge back to the man she loves, a symphony of restoration that will heal the broken landscape of their home. But as the orchestra tunes in the clearing, the air itself seems to curdle. She calls him, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs, but the response is not a human voice. It is a hollow, discordant resonance, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. He arrives not as the husband she has been curating, but as a spectre. Dressed in a suit of funeral black, his skin the color of stagnant water, he walks through the forest with the terrifying, unswerving gait of a man who has finally stepped over the edge of the world. The orchestra members vanish, scattering like leaves before a storm, leaving him alone in the clearing with the tools of his own destruction. The sound of the cello's end is not a melody. It is the splintering of cedar and spruce, the agonizing shriek of snapping wire, the brutal, wet crunch of wood meeting bone. He does not stop until the instrument, the very heart of her plan, the vessel of her hopes, is nothing more than a jagged heap of splinters and torn fiber. When he turns to her, his chest heaving, his hands a ruin of trembling veins and raw, angry heat, he is no longer wearing the mask of the man who makes her breakfast. He is a stranger, an interloper who has discarded his disguise, his eyes reflecting the hollow void of a man who has finally run out of time. He touches her cheek, and the sensation is like being branded by ice. He demands an answer to the question that has been simmering in the silence between them for weeks, a question that unravels the fabric of her entire, desperate delusion. She stands frozen, a bird caught in the gaze of a predator that is finally done playing with its food. The wind dies, the forest holds its breath, and in the sudden, deafening quiet, the truth hangs in the air, sharper and more painful than the broken strings at their feet. He is not her husband. He never was. And now, she must decide if she will survive the revelation. The clearing is no longer a place of celebration. It is a sterile, silent operating room where the truth is being laid bare, scalpel by cruel scalpel. Kwon Chae-woo stands before her, not as the man she nurtured, but as a predator who has finally broken free from the cage of his own confusion. The mask of domesticity has been stripped away, leaving only the jagged, starving ambition of a man who has reclaimed his past, and with it, a bottomless, freezing hatred for the woman who dared to tether him to a lie. He mocks her with the precision of a surgeon. He recounts his imitation of the husband she needed, painting his past actions as a grotesque puppet show designed to keep her complacent while he rotted in plain sight. Every gentle moment they shared, every touch she interpreted as love, he reframes as a calculated performance. He had been watching her watch him, a beast feasting on the delusion of its prey. Lee-yeon collapses into the truth of her own inadequacy. She tries to build a bridge out of apologies and desperate, pathetic bargaining, clutching at his sleeves as if they were the ropes of a sinking ship. She weaves a narrative of self-defense, a plea for mercy based on the trauma of being hunted by his own blood, but her words fall into the void of his indifference like stones dropped down a dry well. She clings to the one thing she thinks is true, that somewhere, in the wreckage of their deception, he had felt something real, something that made her feel, for the first time, like the center of someone's world. His laughter is a blade. He doesn't just reject her, he systematically dismantles the architecture of her hope. He grabs her hair, lifting her chin with a violence that forces her to look into the abyss of his eyes that hold no mercy, no recognition, and certainly no love. He tells her that he is the steward of a great erasure. He has come not to forgive, but to dispose. He intends to scrub the landscape of their shared history until there is nothing left but the silence he was born into. The final blow is not a strike, but a question, a cold, dismissive inquiry that shatters the last of her brittle, shallow confidence. When he asks if he ever truly uttered those 3 words, the air rushes out of the world. It is the end of the fairy tale, the moment the monster reminds the girl that she was never a heroine, only a complication. She stands in the heart of the forest, surrounded by the wreckage of a broken cello and the suffocating realization that she has been dancing with a ghost who has no intention of keeping her company in the dark. He turns, leaving her in the quiet of the mountain, and for the first time, the forest is not a place of song, but a cage. The clearing is a crucible of broken illusions. Lee-yeon stands before him, a woman whose world has been systematically dismantled, yet she refuses to let the last brick, the belief in their shared reality, fall. She speaks of their time together as a rebirth, a period where she was lifted from the periphery and placed into the warmth of the fire. To her, it was a sanctuary. To him, it was a theater of the absurd, a performance he endured with a hollowed-out resignation of the damned. Kwon Chae-woo listens to her plea for the validity of their love with a stomach that threatens to revolt. His own body is failing him, a traitorous vessel of nerves and bone, but he finds a perverse, exquisite pleasure in the way her agony mirrors his own decay. When he speaks, his words are not meant to comfort. They are intended to cauterize, to burn away the remaining threads of her sentimentality with the cold, white-hot flame of his contempt. He forces her to confront the cost of her own existence. He reminds her that he arrived in Hwaido not as a companion, but as an executioner, with a mission he had held in his heart since he was old enough to understand the nature of his own bloodline. The mention of Yoon Ju-ha is the turning point, the jagged key that unlocks the final, terrifying door. The name hangs in the air, a bell tolling for the dead. Lee-yeon's breath hitches as the realization hits her, a violent, psychic collision where the fragmented history of her past and the brutal reality of the present fuse together. The woman she once tried to save, the mother figure who had whispered of spruce trees and survival, was the very foundation upon which his vendetta was built. His eyes, once filled with the borrowed warmth of her own delusions, are now dark voids, reflecting a history of incarceration and slow-motion suffering. He speaks of the basement, of the 7 years his mother spent beneath the floorboards of his childhood, a silent, subterranean ghost beneath the feet of the man who would grow up to be his father's heir. He describes her emergence, not as a woman, but as a shell, a hollowed-out ruin. He doesn't just tell her, he forces her to feel the weight of his inheritance. His hands, trembling and cold, wrap around her throat, not to kill, not yet, but to provide a visceral, tactile lesson in the nature of power. He pulls her into his space, her neck bending under the pressure of his fury, forcing her to look into the furnace of his hatred. The romantic facade is dead. There is no sanctuary, no fire to warm her, only the crushing grip of a man who has decided that the only honest way to love is to destroy. He asks her if she still believes in the sanctity of their connection, his voice a rasping, venomous whisper against her skin, and for the first time, Lee-yeon knows the truth. She is not his wife, she is his final, agonizing testament to everything that was stolen from him. The forest holds its breath, the butterflies have vanished, and in the deepening gloom, the only thing that remains is the sound of her own gasping breath against his relentless, iron fingers. The human mind is a master of rewriting tragedies into something palatable, a survival mechanism for the truly desperate. Lee-yeon stands before him, her throat burning, her thoughts a chaotic storm of self-defense. She wants to scream that she did not sell his mother for a handful of silver. She wants to explain that it was an act of mercy, a desperate bid to send a dying woman back to the child she craved. But the truth is a jagged piece of glass, and as she prepares to force it past her lips, she stops. Would telling him her version of the truth heal his wound, or simply salt it? The silence that follows is thick, suffocating, a heavy fog rolling into the clearing. Chae-woo stands there, his broad chest heaving, his frame vibrating with a profound, neurological agony. He admits that looking at her makes him physically tremble, a toxic cocktail of hatred and an intimacy he can no longer justify. He vows to endure her, to harbor his malice like a dark religion. And in that moment, Lee-yeon feels the familiar, crushing weight of her childhood. She has always been the scapegoat, the lightning rod for other people's storms. Desperation fractures her silence. The words spill out, frantic and unpolished. A plea that she was merely a messenger, a child caught in the gears of a much larger, uglier machine. But to a man whose childhood was spent above a silent, buried mother, her excuses sound like the practiced lies of a serpent. His fingers tighten against her throat, just enough to steal her oxygen, just enough to remind her who holds the lease on her life. He mocks her, asking if she still takes him for the simpleton who used to cook her meals and clear her path. The illusion of the gentle shepherd is entirely dead, replaced by a creature of cold, calculating vengeance. When he finally releases his grip, the sudden absence of his heat feels colder than the winter wind. Panicking at the growing distance between them, Lee-yeon offers him a horrific bargain, a dynamic she learned from the cruel architecture of her family. She begs him to keep her close, to torment her, to use her body as a vessel for his rage. She is used to being hated, used to being punished. She can survive it, as long as he stays. But her final card, her only real leverage, is his own failing body. She reminds him of his affliction, of the deep, heavy sleep that threatens to swallow him whole without her presence. She claims he needs her, a desperate, pathetic reach for a bond that has already turned to ash. Chae-woo merely laughs, a dry, rattling sound that carries the scent of old dust and broken promises. He shatters her last illusion with a casual, devastating efficiency, revealing that her utility to him expired long ago. The chain is severed, the contract cancelled, and as he turns his back on the ruins of her hope, the finality of his words hangs in the air like a sentence. I do not need you. The forest is a graveyard of intentions. He walks away, his stride rhythmic and indifferent, leaving Lee-yeon anchored to the blood-stained earth. There is no backward glance, no hesitation, only the heavy, stifling silence of a bond finally severed. She stands amidst the splintered wood of the ruined cello, a woman abandoned in the wreckage of a life she spent months constructing out of hope and carefully curated lies. Memories of her past, the specters of absent parents and cold, calculating kin, come rushing back, threatening to swallow her whole. The trauma of abandonment is a physical weight, a suffocating garment she thought she had outgrown. Fear, sharp and primal, drives her forward. She stumbles, her legs leaden, and catches him, burying her face against the rigid muscles of his back. She is no longer just pleading. She is screaming into the void, offering a bargain that ignores the very reality of his identity. She offers to play the role of the oblivious wife until the day she dies, if only he will stop, if only he will stay. Her tears are hot, carving paths through the dust on her cheeks, but they fall on a man who has already departed. She is offering her soul to a shadow. When she finally lets go, her grip failing as the weight of his rejection crushes her spirit, his hand flinches. It is a reflex, a ghost of an impulse that contradicts the cold architecture of his resolve. He grabs her hand, a sudden, desperate friction of ice against ice, before he snaps his fingers away, recoiling as if from a burn. The moment of humanity is incinerated by the arrival of the black sedans. They glide into the clearing like sharks, kicking up a shroud of grey dust that masks the horizon. The transition is clinical. Men in sharp, charcoal suits emerge, their presence a rigid enforcement of the New World Order. The man she loved, the man who cooked her meals and chased away the shadows, is being dismantled, replaced by an heir to a fortune built on suffering. Then comes the chaos of the villagers. Chu Jae's voice is a shrill, piercing discord against the low hum of the idling engines. The villagers, their faces contorted by a rage born of desperation and the loss of their sacred ground, descend upon Lee-yeon. She becomes a lightning rod for their fury, a convenient scapegoat for a forest that died long before she arrived. They pull at her hair, their voices a cacophony of accusations, their pickaxes glinting in the dying light like the teeth of a beast. Through the veil of her own hair and the swirling dust, she catches one last look at him. Kwon Chae-woo stands by the open door of the lead sedan, a spectator to her ruin. His expression is not one of concern, nor is it strictly malicious. It is the gaze of a man who has just finished a difficult task and is pleased with the structural integrity of the fallout. He watches her struggle, watches her hit the ground, and in his eyes, there is a chilling, detached satisfaction. The summer is breaking, the air turning thin and sharp with the promise of a cold that has no end. As the engines roar to life and the convoy accelerates, he vanishes, dissolving into the haze like a mirage. Lee-yeon remains on the dirt, broken and shivering, listening to the fading echo of wheels on gravel, realizing at last that the forest was never meant to be restored. It was only meant to be buried. The world of Hwaido has become a landscape of jagged edges and splintered wood. Young Ju-baek, his small hands white-knuckled around the salvaged nameplate of the Spruce Tree Hospital, watches from the shadows of an alleyway. He is a silent witness to a systematic erasure. The black sedans are not merely vehicles, they are harbingers of a cold, mechanical violence. Men with the hollowed-out eyes of ghosts methodically dismantle the place, their baseball bats and golf clubs turning the sanctuary of his childhood into a chaotic, resonant tomb of breaking glass and splintering timber. Curiosity, that dangerous, shimmering trap for the young, lures him toward the trunk of an open car. Inside lies a collection of implements that hold the terrifying magnetism of the unknown, syringes, ropes, and tools of extraction that have no place in the world of a child. He climbs inside, a small, vibrant secret in the back of a black car, and with a heavy slam of the trunk, the lid of his own life closes, plunging him into a darkness that smells of cold metal and impending travel. Weeks later, the house remains a mausoleum. Lee-yeon exists in a state of suspended animation, a statue carved from grief and disbelief. The front yard, once a tapestry of life tended with calloused, loving fingers, is now a wasteland of trampled blossoms and uprooted dreams. The sacred tree, a silent witness to 500 years of history, lies butchered, its trunk scarred by claw-like marks that speak to a malice far older and deeper than the man who ordered it. Her life has been wiped clean of his presence. The second floor, once the stage for their volatile, cryptic dance, is now an empty void, echoing with the silence of a guest who never truly existed. Kwon Chae-woo sits across from her, a frantic, weary guardian trying to coax warmth back into a flame that has been doused in ice. She talks of ice cream and sunlight, of sunglasses and the simple, mundane relief of a beautiful day, but her words dissolve against the wall of Lee-yeon's dissociation. Lee-yeon is a fragile parchment, waiting to crumble at the lightest touch. The physical wounds on her neck, the angry, red wheals left by the villagers' claws, are slowly fading, but the psychological hemorrhage is constant. She is a woman who has been hollowed out, her vitality drained by the realization that her husband was a ghost, a beautifully orchestrated lie who left nothing behind but dust and destruction. She is like a dry leaf caught in a stagnant wind, drifting toward a winter that refuses to end. The silence of the house is not just the absence of sound. It is the presence of an erasure so absolute that even the air feels thin, as if the oxygen itself is being rationed for those who are still allowed to exist. The trauma has set in, cold and permanent, and beneath the surface, the dark, mechanical machinery of the Kwon family is already moving toward its next, inevitable harvest. The house is a museum of vanished warmth. Kwon Chae-woo's voice, intended to be a lifeline, falls flat against the suffocating stillness of the room. She speaks of aesthetics, of the hospital brochures and the eyesores in the garden, but Lee-yeon hears only the hum of an ending. To her, the dying pots and the scorched earth are not chores, they are a grim, undeniable ledger of her own futility. What is the point of dressing a corpse, she wonders, when the soul has already departed the grounds? A profound, clinical detachment has begun to set in. Lee-yeon exists in a grey space between wakefulness and a dream she cannot escape. She remembers the sunrise, nauseating and cold, and the frantic, spasmodic dialing of a number that no longer connects to the living world. The boundary between the real and the manufactured has dissolved, leaving her adrift. A gnawing sense of wrongness, like a parasite burrowing into her nerves, drives her out of the house. At the district office, the truth is laid out in cold, black and white ink, a family register that bears no mark of his existence. He is a ghost, a smudge on the glass of her history that has been wiped away with surgical precision. She trembles, the paper vibrating in her grip, only to realize that her feet are shod in mismatched remnants, a sneaker and a slipper. It is the perfect, grotesque emblem of her sanity. She begins to laugh, a sound that starts in her throat and ends in a fractured, rhythmic hysteria that draws the eyes of strangers. But the most haunting part is not the absence, it is the phantom sensory memory. She claims, with the erratic, flickering intensity of the traumatized, that his scent still clings to the walls, the furniture, and the very air she breathes. She is convinced she is being haunted by a deliberate, gaslighting design. Kwon Chae-woo attempts to anchor her with the pragmatism of the jilted, dismissing love as a natural disaster one must simply outlast. Yet, Kwon Chae-woo's own eyes reveal the lie, a hollow, compassionate depth that betrays a shared, buried history of loss. Lee-yeon is a tree that has been ripped from the earth, her roots exposed to the harsh, unforgiving light of a world that no longer recognizes her. She is terrified by the scale of her own misery, questioning if she is merely a petulant child mourning a trivial loss, or if she has truly been eviscerated. She stares at her own hands, those long, capable fingers that can coax life from rotting bark and withered saplings, and finds them trembling like reeds in a gale. She is a master of botanical resurrection, a healer of the dying, yet she cannot close the wound in her own chest. As the light in the room fades, leaving them in the blue, uncertain dusk, Kwon Chae-woo makes a final, quiet offer, a pilgrimage to the trees. Lee-yeon stares at the horizon, her spirit feeling less like a woman and more like a collection of fragile, decaying leaves, waiting for a wind that will either carry her to safety or tear her to pieces. The forest waits. And in its shadows, something is listening. The silence in the house is no longer a void. It has become a companion. After Kwon Chae-woo's worried departure, Lee-yeon retreats into the only architecture she trusts, the clinical, cold reality of her work. She surrounds herself with patient records and botanical theses, a desperate attempt to reconstruct a self that feels like it has been pruned down to the root. She is a surgeon of the forest, capable of performing radical amputations and grafting new life onto dying wood, yet she is paralyzed by the wreckage of her own history. There is a cruel, rhythmic irony in her labor. She tries to fix the world, even as the memory of his voice, telling her she was no longer of any use, loops through her mind like a broken record. When the phone rings, the air in the room seems to crystallize. Her name appears on the screen, but her heart is elsewhere, stranded on that final day in the clearing. The request is simple, a bureaucratic chore regarding the dead spirit tree, but to Lee-yeon, it is a demand to witness a burial. That tree is not just wood and sap, it is a monument to the moment he became a stranger. She remembers the wooden flower, that grotesque, blood-stained gift, and the way the forest died in the silence of his returning memories. She cannot face the corpse of the tree, for it is a mirror of her own stomped-out heart. But the conversation drifts, touching on a new, jagged piece of anxiety. Ju-baek has vanished. When the call ends, the house settles back into a predatory quiet. Hunger strikes, not as a necessity, but as a compulsion. She goes to the kitchen, opening the refrigerator to find side dishes that taste of salt and phantom decay. They are repulsive, yet she eats with a frantic, mechanical hunger. She chews and swallows, forcing the food down her throat as if it were an act of penance. She is digesting his history. Every bite is a mouthful of the darkness he described, the basement, the 7 years of shadow, the mother who emerged from the earth like a ghost. She is consuming his trauma, trying to process the poison of his vengeance by taking it into her own body. He told her that she was a liar, a woman whose every word was a manipulation, and now she is trying to prove him wrong by swallowing his vitriol until she can no longer taste her own existence. The body, however, has a limit to what it can bear. The internal chemistry of her grief rebels. She is on her feet in an instant, a blur of motion toward the sink, where the meal she forced down is violently rejected. She heaves, retching into the basin as the water runs, the sound of her own gasping breath filling the kitchen. Her eyes stream with tears, not from sorrow, but from the brutal, physical effort of trying to exist in the wake of a man who demanded she witness his ruin. She is attempting to digest a lifetime of sins, both hers and his, but the weight of it is too much. As she grips the porcelain, her knuckles white and shaking, she realizes that the ending was written long before they met. She is the offender, he is the victim, and the thread that binds them is fraying tighter and tighter until it threatens to draw blood. Outside, the night deepens. In the distance, somewhere, a boy is hiding in the dark, and a secret is waiting to be unearthed. And for Lee-yeon, there is no sleep, only the long, bitter wait for the next wave of nausea to pass. The night is thick with the scent of cheap soju and the jagged edges of broken hearts. Ju Dong-mi, a woman who wears her rage like a tailored suit, has descended upon the house. She is a whirlwind of drunken indignation, her words a cacophony of heartbreak and ego, slamming her glass against the table as if to beat the world into submission. Lee-yeon, who usually retreats from such raw displays, finds herself caught in the slipstream of Dong-amai's chaos. For the first time in weeks, the crushing silence of her home is breached by the messy, human noise of a friend. Dong-amai's fury is a distorted mirror of Lee-yeon's own hollowed-out grief. As the booze flows and the secrets spill, the pretense of Lee-yeon's composure begins to fray. The mention of his name, that name which feels like a brand burned into her skin, is inevitable. In the haze of the night, Lee-yeon speaks the forbidden truth. He did not merely leave. He is a phantom, a construct of her own longing that has been erased from the reality of the world. He is dead in the way that matters most. He no longer exists as the man she loved. The hangover of reality is brutal, yet it serves as a catalyst. Lee-yeon begins to stir. She opens the windows, letting the stale, trapped air of her morning escape. She vacuumed the dust from the floors, clearing away the invisible remnants of his presence. She picks up her tools, the steel needles and nutrient vials, and returns to the forest. She is summoned to the old lady tree, a landmark of the valley, now drooping and grey with the onset of blight. The townspeople whisper that the tree is dying of a broken heart, unable to survive the loss of its companion. Lee-yeon stands before the majestic, dying form, her eyes tracing the pattern of the infection. She sees the weak bark, the skeletal branches, and the encroaching decay. As she begins to speak, her voice is steady, fueled by a sudden, fierce defiance against the inevitability of rot. She champions the resilience of the tree, pointing to the saplings that cluster around its base, the silent, living legacy that refuses to let the mother fall. She is in the middle of a fervent defense, a lecture on survival, when she stops. Her breath hitches. The world seems to tilt on its axis. A sudden, sharp chill ripples across her skin, raising goosebumps that have nothing to do with the temperature of the air. She freezes, her eyes widening, staring at a patch of empty sky that feels suddenly, violently occupied. The air tastes of ozone and old blood. She coughs, a harsh, racking sound that scrapes the inside of her throat, her face draining of color until she is as pale as the dead leaves at her feet. Kwon Chae-woo calls out to her, concern etched into her lines, but Lee-yeon cannot hear her. The scent of him, not the memory of it, but the chilling, physical reality of it, has just drifted through the forest. Somewhere, in the spaces between the trees, someone is watching. And as she stares into the void of the woods, she realizes that the ending she thought she survived was only the prologue to something much, much darker. The lecture hall is a cavern of echoes, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and dust. Lee-yeon stands in the shadows of the backstage, her fingers trembling against a script that feels less like a speech and more like a confession. The speaker on stage, a master of resonance and timbre, speaks of the scars that define a tree's unique song, of the ice, the wind, and the crushing weight of snow that forces a trunk to grow into something twisted, something resilient, something haunting. Her thoughts, however, are 1,000 miles away, anchored to a singular, terrifying revelation. 12 weeks. A window of time that stretches back to the gentle, soft-spoken stranger who loved her before the darkness claimed him, before the memories returned and he dissolved into the void. A life is taking root in the silent, hidden places of her own body, a final, miraculous trace of the man she thought she had lost to the earth. The fear is cold, a sudden tremor in her marrow, but it is eclipsed by a warmth she hasn't felt since the garden was burned. As the lecture concludes, the audience dissipates into the late afternoon sun. Lee-yeon finds herself pulled, almost against her will, to the base of the spirit tree. It is a monument to their shared wreckage, its bark a map of the violence that tore through her life. She expects to be met with the suffocating weight of her own ruin, but instead, she sees it, a solitary, stubborn blossom clinging to a dead branch. It is an impossibility. A defiant pulse of color against a grey, skeletal horizon. The sight of it triggers a shift in her soul, a tectonic movement where the jagged illusions of the past finally settle into the bedrock of memory. She is no longer just mourning a ghost, she is remembering a man. She remembers the aggressive, desperate care in his eyes, the way he hunted with his heart, and the profound, quiet terror of being abandoned. The man who was once a puzzle of conflicting identities now coalesces into a single, aching truth. The grief that has held her captive begins to transform. She realizes that she is not a vessel for his absence, but a garden for his legacy. She pulls out her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen, the weight of the decision pressing against her ribs like a physical stone. When she calls Kwon Chae-woo, her voice is not broken, but sharpened by a newfound, terrifying clarity. She does not ask for comfort, she asks for closure. She asks for a funeral. It is time to prune the dead wood. As she reaches up, her fingers graze the fragile petals of the spirit tree's final, impossible flower. It detaches with a whisper, yielding to her touch. She tucks it into her pocket, feeling the softness of it against her hip, a secret, living thing nestled against the new life growing within her. She turns away from the tree, not walking back into the gloom, but toward the thin, persistent line of light breaking over the horizon. The fight was never against the tree, or the wind, or the winter. It was always about learning how to keep growing when the branches have been shorn away. Behind her, the forest is quiet, but for the first time, it does not feel empty. It feels like an ending that is, finally, beginning. The yard is no longer a graveyard of broken illusions. It is a quiet, consecrated space beneath the towering reach of the trees. Lee-yeon drives the shovel into the earth, the rhythmic, metallic bite of steel against soil serving as the only eulogy for a man who, in the eyes of the law and the world, never drew a breath. Her skin is flushed with the heat of the labor, a stark, vital contrast to the cold, porcelain-like stillness she had maintained for weeks. She is sweating, she is breathing, and for the first time, she is undeniably alive. Kwon Chae-woo watches from the periphery, caught between amusement and a deep, aching concern. She sees the funeral for what it is, a private, exorcistic ritual. There is no casket, no gravestone, and no body. There is only a small, intricate wooden carving, a gift from a shadow, glowing with a faint, crimson hue as it descends into the dark, welcoming earth. Lee-yeon seals the pit, the earth mounding over the relic like a closing chapter. Every shovel of dirt is a silencing of the noise that has haunted her house. She is balancing the books of her own heart, meticulously erasing the debt of his presence. When the music begins, it is not a dirge of sorrow, but the bright, insistent notes of Vivaldi's Spring. The dissonance is jarring, yet it fits. If funerals are for the living, then this melody is an act of defiance, a refusal to let the winter of his memory define the seasons that are yet to come. Kwon Chae-woo stands in her black dress, a tragic, cinematic figure against the backdrop of the ruined garden, her eyes misty. She attempts to offer a final, biting tribute to a man she never truly understood, but the anger she intended to vent dissolves into a weary, begrudging respect. She finds herself bidding farewell to a man who was both a catastrophe and a spark, conceding that some relationships are simply too violent to survive the morning light. Lee-yeon leans on the shovel, watching the white chrysanthemum petals drift onto the mound. She feels the weight of the past shifting, turning from a crushing burden into something she can finally carry. The resentment, the questions, the lingering ghosts of his voice, she chooses to leave them here, in the soil. She turns to Kwon Chae-woo, a small, genuine smile finally breaking the heavy architecture of her expression. She looks at her friend, the woman who has stood by her through the disintegration of her world, and she decides it is time to stop hiding the truth. She reaches out, her hand resting over the quiet, hidden geography of her abdomen. The air in the garden seems to go still. The wind dies down, and the music skips a beat. She speaks, and her voice is a soft, terrifying, and beautiful tremor that cuts through the silence of the afternoon. She is no longer just a woman who has buried the past. She is a woman who is carrying the future. And now, the real story begins. The confession hangs in the air, a fragile, trembling thing that stops time itself. Kwon Chae-woo's composure, usually as ironclad as her loyalty, shatters in an instant. The Vivaldi concerto, once a cheerful accompaniment to their ritual, seems to warp, the melody darkening with the phantom sound of gathering storm clouds. 3 months. The silence that follows is not one of emptiness, but of 1,000 unsaid realizations blooming in the sudden, terrifying light of a new truth. Lee-yeon's hands, once steady enough to graft skin onto bark, are now restless, clutching at the air behind her back as she navigates the wreckage of her previous life to make room for this singular, impossible anchor. She is a twisted, beautiful thing, a human kwabegi, knotted and resilient, born from the heat of trauma and the pressure of a history that promised her nothing but infertility. There is a shift in her eyes, a shedding of the exhausted skin she has worn for months. The woman who walked through the funeral like a ghost is gone. In her place stands something far more formidable. She has been a healer of broken trees, an artisan of resurrection, but she has spent her life acting as a hollow vessel. Now, for the first time, she sees herself as a foundation. She is the soil, the nutrient, and the shelter. The fear remains, a jagged, cold splinter in her gut, but it is dwarfed by the absolute, blinding clarity of her purpose. She will not be discarded. She will not be ignored. She will be the one who nurtures, the one who sustains. Chu Jae observes the transformation with a mixture of grief and profound relief. She thinks of her own barrenness, a hidden, bitter ache she keeps tucked behind her sharp wit and stylish armor. She remembers a dream from the night before, a vision of a small, relentless tiger cub, waddling into the shadows of a great tree, while a massive, wounded beast howls at the empty, barren ground. It was an omen, a premonition of this exact moment. The two women embrace, a quiet, desperate collision of flesh and spirit amidst the scent of turned earth and drying petals. They are unconventional, flawed, and utterly alone in a world that demands a blueprint they refuse to follow. Lee-yeon's resolve is absolute, a steel-hard vow that ripples out from her soul. She will not live in the void. She will not let the absence of the father define the narrative of the child. She will turn the wreckage of her love for him into a masterclass on how to love everything else, the trees, the seasons, and the chaotic, beautiful world that nearly broke her. She has buried the man, but she is planting a forest in his place. As the wind picks up, rustling the leaves of the great tree overhead, Lee-yeon looks toward the horizon. The storm clouds are indeed gathering, dark and heavy on the edge of the sky. But for the first time in her life, she is not afraid of the rain. She knows that without the storm, nothing truly grows. Deep in the woods, however, the silence is suddenly broken. A branch snaps, distinct and deliberate, as if something or someone has been listening to every word. The yard falls into a heavy, resonant silence. Lee-yeon stands before the fresh mound of earth, the white chrysanthemum a stark, lonely star against the dark soil. She is no longer the woman who shattered under the weight of her own history. The girl who once lived in the shadow of her own pain has been pruned, reshaped, and finally, she has bloomed. She whispers a soft, final benediction into the breeze. A goodbye to a first love who exists now only as a phantom, a beautiful, tragic error she has finally forgiven. She turns away, leaving the man who never truly was to sleep in the quiet dark of her memory, where he can no longer hurt her, and where she no longer needs him to wake. But worlds away, in a room sterile and suffocating, the air vibrates with the rhythmic, mechanical pulse of a life support machine. Kwon Chae-woo lies in the grip of a slumber so profound it mimics death. He is a man emptied of his own spirit, his physical shell pushed to the brink of collapse by the sheer, agonizing effort of his own existence. Beside him, Jang Beam he keeps watch, a man forged in the same brutal fire, a hunting dog raised in the cramped, airless kennels of the Kwon family's ambition. He looks at his master with a mix of reverence and cold, analytical impatience. He cannot comprehend why a man of such potential would tether his soul to a woman in a valley. To Beam the world is a game of chess played with razors. He remembers the childhood they shared, a blurred montage of discarded playmates and the stench of bodies disposed of in the dark. He and Chae-woo were two of a kind, both born to serve, both born to destroy. But the game has changed. The plan, 2 years in the making, is a masterpiece of subversion. From the exposure of the Kwon's 80-year stranglehold on the nation to the unraveling of their illicit pharmaceutical empire, every piece is poised for the endgame. They are ready to set the country ablaze to purge the rot of the gangster dynasty. The only variable, the only flaw in the clockwork of their vengeance, is the man on the bed. The phone buzzes, a sharp, invasive sound that slices through the gloom. It is the voice of the enemy, the architect of their cage. The instruction is chillingly polite, veiled in the soft language of a guardian who holds a leash. They want the boy. Jiu Beck. Beam he stares at the sleeping master, his face a mask of loyal treachery. He knows the weight of the demand. To control the woman, they must possess the child. He looks at Chae-woo, whose eyes remain shut, oblivious to the fact that his pawn is about to be moved. A dark, hollow guilt settles in Beam he's chest, but it is quickly stifled by the cold efficiency of his training. He speaks into the phone, his voice a steady, emotionless hum. He agrees to the terms. He will ensure the child is brought into the fold, whether through gentle guidance or something far more surgical. As he hangs up, he looks down at the master he is sworn to protect, the master he is about to betray to save the mission. He needs to force the sleeping giant awake, even if the cost is the very thing the man holds most dear. The storm is coming, and in the morning, the garden in the valley will be the first thing to burn. The garden, once a theatre of neglect, has been meticulously restored. Lee-yeon moves through the soil like a woman exorcising her own history, turning the earth, discarding the rot, and planting life where there was only absence. She eats, she sleeps, and she waits for the cool breath of autumn to settle over the valley. But the serenity is a thin veil, easily torn. When the call from Kwon Chae-woo comes, it arrives with a static charge of dread. Ji-wook, the boy who is as much a part of her world as the roots of the trees, has vanished. The conversation is cut short by a visceral intrusion, the heavy, rhythmic pounding of a fist against her front door. The police have arrived. The air in the room suddenly thins, turning metallic and cold. As the officer questions her, Lee-yeon feels the familiar, crushing weight of guilt, the suffocating realization that while she was busy burying her own ghosts, the world was quietly stealing a child. She guides them to her security system, the eyes she installed in the days of her own terror, and the monitors flicker to life. They scour the footage. The timeline crawls back to the day the darkness descended, the day Kwon Chae-woo vanished. On the grainy, high-contrast screen, they see the moment of impact. The black sedan, the men moving with the surgical precision of predators, the violence of the intrusion. And there, pressed against the cold brick of the exterior wall, is Ji-wook. The room holds its breath. The child, usually indifferent to the machinery of the adult world, is doing the impossible. He isn't fleeing, he is approaching. Lee-yeon leans in, her vision tunneling as the police officer pushes the image to its limit. The boy's small, pale hand reaches toward the open trunk of the sedan. The digital grain clears, revealing the object of his fixation. It is not a toy, nor a treat, but a glass container holding a nightmare. A scorpion, its pincers weaving a rhythmic, hypnotic dance in the shadows of the vehicle. A jolt of pure, icy clarity hits Lee-yeon. Ji-wook hadn't been kidnapped by accident. He had been lured by a creature as dark and dangerous as the men who wielded it. Her face drains of color as the pieces lock together in a terrifying, jagged mosaic. The men who took Chae-woo were not just thugs, they were handlers of something far more venomous. The screen shows the boy sliding into the trunk, a moth drawn to a lethal, wriggling flame. The room feels like a tomb. Lee-yeon grips the back of the sofa, her knuckles white, her breath shallow. She has spent her life nurturing the growth of living things, but she is staring at a screen that documents a harvest of a different kind. The boy is gone, spirited away into the bowels of a machine that belongs to the most dangerous family in the country. And somewhere in the dark, the scorpion is still waiting. The marble halls of the estate are not a home. They are throat, dark and slick, swallowing Ji-wook whole. Every step he takes across the polished stone feels like a betrayal of his own balance, his toes curling in useless protest against the floor. For a month, he has been a ghost in his own life, haunted by the memory of the scorpion's pincers that lured him into that metal tomb. Now, the luxury he is afforded is nothing more than the velvet lining of a coffin. The transition from the chicken coop, where he spent his nights reciting the names of the world's most venomous insects to keep the terror at bay, to this grand, sun-drenched hanok, is a masterstroke of psychological cruelty. He was fed scraps and filth. Now he is given silk and sunlight. He was treated like vermin. Now he is treated like a prize. But the golden cage remains a cage, and the scent of blooming flowers in the courtyard does not mask the underlying stench of rot that permeates the Kwon estate. Jang Beam he moves through these halls like a shadow tethered to a purpose. There is a strange, fractured gentleness in his movements, the kind of care one might give a trophy before it is put on display. He leads the boy into the heart of the structure, where the light hits the floorboards with a surgical precision. In the center of the room, standing against the glare of the window, is the architect of this imprisonment. He is a silhouette carved out of malice, his features obscured by the backlighting. The command is whispered, cool and absolute, as if Ji-wook were nothing more than a piece of furniture to be cleaned and placed in a corner. The boy is led away, but his defiance is a frantic, silent thing. He spends his days measuring the distance between his room and the outside world, sprinting through corridors that seem to stretch and warp as he runs. He is seeking a ghost, the director, the woman with the scent of pine and soil, the only person who treated his existence as something more than an anomaly. He shouts, he lunges, but the guards simply sigh, their indifference more painful than their violence. They know he is lost in the labyrinth of the Kwon family's design. One afternoon, the hunger for escape drives him deeper than ever before. He hears the heavy, rhythmic thud of pursuers, the frantic staccato of boots on stone. He ducks into an alcove, his fingers scrambling for a handle. The door gives way. The room is heavy, pressurized, and silent, save for the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of a humidifier. The air is thick with the scent of ozone and something sharp, metallic, and familiar. The mist hangs in the air like a ghost's breath. Ji-wook blinks, the darkness of his pursuit falling away as his eyes adjust to the dim, clinical light. In the center of the room, tethered to the machines that measure his flickering life, lies the man who once hunted with his heart. The boy stops. The air in his lungs turns to glass. He recognizes the lines of the face, the stillness of the frame, the presence that once haunted his own memories. It is the male. The one who survived the valley. The one who was supposed to be dead. Ju-baek's world narrows to the sight of the sleeping master, and for the first time since the scorpion danced in the dark, he realizes he hasn't been brought to a prison at all. He has been brought to the scene of a crime. And the man on the bed is starting to breathe. The air in the room is clinical, sterile, and heavy with the hum of machinery. Ju-baek's small hands tremble as he reaches out, his touch frantic against the cold skin of the man who lies dormant. To the boy, this is a miracle, a reunion with the only person who possessed the rough, tangible reality he craves. He is a child lost in a labyrinth, grabbing at a ghost, desperately tallying the familiar features. The sharp nose, the broad frame, the solid, unyielding length of a man who once was his anchor. His voice is a desperate, soaring note of triumph that is abruptly silenced by the heavy, practiced hand of Jang Beam-hee. As the boy is dragged away, the door latch clicks, a finality that masks a subtle, tremor-like twitch in the eyelids of the man left behind. Miles away, Lee-yeon is trapped in a different kind of cage. She paces the living room, the phone pressed to her ear like a lit fuse. Every ring is a beat of a heart she no longer owns. When the voice on the other end finally answers, slick, condescending, and dangerously amused, the temperature in the room seems to drop. Kwon Chae-woo does not offer comfort. He offers a transaction. He toyed with the idea of the missing boy as one might examine an interesting insect, his tone lazy and devoid of empathy. Lee-yeon's desperation is a physical ache, a tightening in her chest that makes it difficult to draw breath. She realizes then that she is not bargaining for a lost child. She is bargaining with a predator who has already decided the price of his soul. While she struggles to maintain her composure, the man on the bed begins to stir. Kwon Chae-woo wakes to a world that feels wrong. His limbs are leaden, his skin marked by the deathly pallor of a long, induced hibernation. He reaches out for a warmth that isn't there, his fingers grazing only the cold, unyielding weave of a blanket. The room is alien, a gilded sanctuary that smells of nothing, completely devoid of the sharp, grounding scent of earth and medicinal sap that defined his life in the valley. He stands, his movements jagged and raw, his mind a battlefield where two ghosts fight for dominance. The nightmare is lingering, a sensory ghost of Lee-yeon's skin, her voice, the weight of her against him. He moves not by thought, but by an animalistic, desperate instinct. He tears open the curtains, and the reality that greets him is a hollow, gilded cage. He stumbles into the hallway, driven by a thirst that feels like fire in his throat. He descends upon an attendant with the predatory intensity of a man who has forgotten everything except the woman he needs to find. He drinks from a vase, the water spilling over his chin, his eyes wide and vacant of recognition, yet sharp with a singular, agonizing question. He crushes the flower in his hand, a beautiful, bruised thing, and stares at the servant with a gaze that promises blood. The question he utters is not a request, it is a declaration of war. He is back in the heart of the monster's den, and he is hunting for the only thing that makes the world real. He does not know where he is, or why he was sleeping, or why his blood feels like ice. He only knows that he is missing his half. And in the silence that follows his question, the entire house seems to hold its breath, waiting to see which side of him will win, the monster or the man. The attendant is paralyzed, her resolve fraying under the gaze of a man who has returned from a place beyond human comprehension. Kwon Chae-woo is a ruin of a man, hollowed by sleep, sharpened by hunger, and radiating a predator's dangerous instability. He demands the woman he calls his wife, and when the attendant hesitates, the violence coiled in his posture promises to tear the house down to find her. They move through the dark, marble-lined halls, a descent into the claustrophobic depths of the estate. Then, at the turn of a corner, he encounters his own reflection. The mirror does not show him a man, it shows him a battlefield. As he stares into the glass, the dam breaks. The memories he had suppressed, the cruelties he had committed, and the venomous words he had spat at Lee-yeon flood back with the force of a tidal wave. He sees the woman he tried to bury, the orchard he laid to waste, and the broken, weeping creature he left in the wreckage of his own obsession. The dissonance between the man who loved her and the monster who destroyed her is total, and it is tearing him apart from the inside. Then, the impossible happens. A hand, darker than the reflection itself, snakes out from the silvered glass and clamps around his throat. It is his own hand. The reflection, the version of him that had lived in the valley, the dog that had traded its leash for her affection, is staring back with red, desperate eyes. It is a dual existence, two versions of the same soul, each disgusted by the other. The hunting dog that learned to love is fighting the cold, calculating son of the Kwon dynasty for dominance of the flesh. In the silence of the hallway, a guttural, terrifying struggle unfolds. Kwon Chae-woo grips his own wrist, his fingers digging into his own skin until the mirror begins to spider web under the pressure. The two halves of his psyche tear at one another, neither willing to yield. One desires to claim the entirety of the woman, the other wishes to incinerate her to escape the shame of his own softness. They are consuming each other, a violent synthesis of greed, jealousy, and broken love. With a final, jagged crack, the mirror shatters. The reflections merge. He stands amidst the debris, gasping, sweat slicking his skin, his mind no longer a battlefield but a single, terrifying monolith of memory. He knows exactly what he has done. He knows exactly who he is. And he knows exactly what he has lost. He leaves the trembling attendant behind, his gait unsteady, his heart hammering against his ribs with a desperate, frantic rhythm. He isn't walking. He is fleeing toward a ghost. He reaches the guest room, the prison he thought held her, and kicks the door wide, his chest heaving, his mouth open to breathe her name. But the room is a tomb of empty space. There is no scent of her here. There is only the dust of a cruel design. A voice, smooth and sharp as a razor, cuts through the stillness from the doorway. Kwon Chae-woo stands there, adjusting his cuffs with the detached elegance of a man watching a play, his eyes alight with the amusement of a puppeteer whose favorite doll has finally learned to scream. The master of the house has come to claim his due, and the storm is only just beginning. The air in the room is suffocating, thick with the scent of spilled whiskey and the metallic tang of fresh blood. Kwon Chae-woo stands before the man who wears his own face like a mirror, Kwon Chae-woo. They are two sides of a fractured coin, brothers in name, enemies in spirit. Chae-woo speaks with a calm, predatory ease, mocking the domestic fantasy Chae-woo had tried to build. He speaks of leashes, of playing house, and of the hollow nature of a life lived for someone else. The tension snaps like a brittle bone. A bottle shatters against the wall, a jagged eruption of glass and amber liquid. Chae-woo's composure, the thin veneer of the young master, dissolves. He is a man haunted by the ghost of a mother starved to death in the damp dark of this very house, and now, the architect of that misery dares to smile at him. He lunges, his hands finding the collar of the air, his knuckles white with the strain of a lifetime of suppressed rage. But Chae-woo is a master of the long game. He wields information like a blade, whispering the name of a girl, Lee-yeon, and the price she paid for her loyalty. The revelation hits Chae-woo harder than any bullet. The one thing he kept pure, the one sanctuary in his life of blood and wire, is being unraveled before his eyes. He is being told that his salvation was part of their transaction, a calculated move in their chess match. Chae-woo's world bleeds into static. He is directed to do what he does best, bury the truth beneath 6 feet of dirt. The scene shifts. The estate shadows are replaced by the damp, oppressive atmosphere of a forest at night. He is a figure in a black raincoat, the embodiment of a funeral that never ends. Beneath his boots, the earth screams. A hand, desperate and clawing, emerges from the soil, a subordinate, a witness, a piece of the Kwon family's machinery being ground into the dust. Chae-woo listens to the man's panic, his own face a mask of terrifying serenity. He hums a lullaby for the dying, his foot rising and falling, a rhythmic, bone-crushing cadence. Then, a rustle. A flicker of movement in the brush. The hunter's instinct overrides the man's psyche. He abandons the dying wretch, grabbing a chainsaw that hums with a hungry, vibrating life. He moves through the trees like a shadow, his prey a small, darting figure. He catches them with the ease of a spider snaring a moth, a cello string tightening around their neck, a garrote of music and malice. He forces the figure to turn. He expects terror, the kind that tastes like copper on the tongue. Instead, he meets eyes that hold a haunting, inexplicable calm. They are eyes that belong to a memory he thought he had buried in the valley. Before he can process the shock, the world fractures. A sharp, rhythmic impact hammers against his skull. Once, twice, again. His consciousness begins to fray, the forest spinning into a kaleidoscope of black and white. He drops to his knees, his grip loosening on the weapon. As the darkness closes in, the last thing he sees is not the face of an enemy, but the lonely, innocent gaze of the woman he was meant to destroy. He falls into the void, leaving behind the screams of the man in the dirt and the silence of the girl who finally stopped running. The dock at Hwaido is a study in unnatural stillness. Where there should be the frantic, brine-soaked energy of a working port, there is only the eerie silence of a vacuum. The wind does not blow here. It seems to hold its breath, intimidated by the line of stone-faced men standing guard. In the center of this staged desolation sits Kwon Chae-woo, his gaze as sharp and polished as a surgical blade, dissecting Lee-yeon from across the table. Lee-yeon clutches her teacup, her fingers white-knuckled against the porcelain. The tea has long since turned cold, a mirror of the chilling dread pooling in her stomach. She had come here for a child, for Ju-baek, but with every passing second, the air grows thinner, and the realization takes root. She is not negotiating with a man, but with a collector of souls. Chae-wook's voice is a smooth, rhythmic drift of poison. He speaks of the Kwon family's traditions, the systematic dismantling of humanity, the crushing of the spirit until all that remains is the blind, feral obedience of a hound. He speaks of doghouses and broken wills as if they were simple architectural choices, his face fixed in a mask of polite, terrifying indifference. He leans forward, the sunlight catching the predatory glint in his eyes. He is no longer asking, he is demanding a ledger entry. The price of a child's freedom is not gold, not secrets, but a currency of a more intimate, devastating nature. He mocks her silence, pressing the question with a cruel, rhythmic cadence. He is asking her to quantify her own value, to offer up a life swap that leaves no room for her own survival. Across the divide, Lee-yeon's memories flicker like a dying candle, the blood-soaked reality of the life she tried to escape versus this bright, sanitized hell of the pier. She looks at the sea, vast and indifferent, and realizes that the water won't save her. She is caught in the gears of a machine that consumes anything that breathes. Chae-wook smiles, a thin, paper cut of an expression. He isn't interested in her platitudes or her desperation. He is interested in the moment her resolve finally snaps. He waits for her to speak, to name her price, to offer the only thing she has left to give. But as Lee-yeon looks back at him, the fear begins to curdle into something harder, something forged in the furnace of her own grief. She realizes that whatever she offers, it will never be enough to satisfy a man who treats human beings as disposable assets. In the silence that stretches between them, the seagulls cry out, a sharp, dissonant sound that cuts through the tension. She has reached the edge of the world she knows. Behind her, the dock. Before her, the monster. And in the distance, she can almost hear the soft, rhythmic scraping of a shovel against the earth, a reminder of exactly what happens to those who cannot pay the bill. She opens her mouth to answer, but before the words can escape, a shadow falls over the table, and the cold reality of the trade begins to sink its teeth in. The air on the Hwaido dock is no longer just cold. It is jagged with the weight of revelations that threaten to tear reality apart. Lee-yeon sits before Kwon Chae-woo, her hands dancing a frantic, silent rhythm against the ceramic of her teacup. She is trying to negotiate for a child's soul with the currency of gardening, a desperate, absurd trade intended to anchor a monster in the soil rather than in his own cruelty. She offers her labor, her expertise, her time, all to buy a reprieve for Ju-baek from the darkness of a doghouse. Chae-wook watches her, his amusement curdling into a sharp, clinical fascination. She is brave, a quality that seems to irritate him as much as it intrigues him. He agrees to her terms with a chilling lack of resistance, but the victory feels hollow, like stepping onto a floor that has already been hollowed out. Then, he begins to dismantle the foundations of her world. The name Yoon Ju-ha hangs in the air, no longer a sacred memory but a skeleton key that unlocks a history of absolute deception. Lee-yeon watches as Chae-wook dissects the myth of Chae-woo's origin, reducing his existence to a byproduct of a kidnapping, a life built on a foundation of stolen time and cello cases. The image of Chae-woo, the man who claimed to be her husband, the man who was both a beast and a broken child, shatters. Lee-yeon feels the nausea of a person realizing they have been sleepwalking through a house of mirrors. The mother she spoke of with reverence was a ghost, and the life Chae-woo clung to was a performance of someone else's design. Chae-wook rises, his movements feline and precise, the absolute architect of this suffering. He looms over her, not with the overt violence of his men, but with the quiet, suffocating gravity of a truth that cannot be undone. He wants Chae-woo to be his reflection, a monster mirroring a monster. He leans in, his shadow swallowing the light on the table, and drops a final, casual piece of information that lands like a lead weight in her gut. the realization that the man she was forced to mother, to love, to fear, and to lose was never her equal. He was a boy, and she was the witness to his entire, fabricated tragedy. The seagulls have gone silent. The sea is a black, bottomless expanse. Lee-yeon stares at him, her throat tight, her mind reeling through the wreckage of everything she thought she knew. She came here to save a child, but she is beginning to fear that there is no one left to save, least of all herself. And in the distance, she can hear the steady, rhythmic thrum of the tide, sounding less like the ocean and more like the beating of a heart that is about to stop. The basement is a tomb of unlit corners and damp stone, a place where the air itself feels bruised. A man sits bound to a rusted chair, his world reduced to the rough fabric of a hood and the suffocating rhythm of his own terror. He is a predator who has been cornered by a greater beast. In the flickering, rhythmic bloom of a lighter's flame, Kwon Chae-woo emerges from the shadows, his face a sculpture of glacial indifference. The man in the chair is a blackmailer, a parasite who fed on the secrets of the elite until he choked on his own greed. He babbles for mercy, his voice fraying like a worn rope, but Chae-woo does not deal in clemency. He deals in consequences. The room is filled with the brittle percussion of glass breaking underfoot as Chae-woo circles his prey. There is a strange, hollow lethargy in his movements. When the black cloth is finally pulled away, the man is met with a gaze that is not human, but a mirror reflecting his own lack of conviction. The man screams about love, about the pain of loss, attempting to anchor his sins in the language of sentiment. Chae-woo stops. For a heartbeat, the grip on his axe tightens, the wooden handle groaning against his palm, as the man's desperate words scrape against the raw, open wound of his own memories. He remembers the taste of love, the scent of earth and sap, the music that was silenced. He stares at the man, but he is seeing the hollow landscape of his own internal wreckage. The violence that follows is not a release, it is a chore. It is surgical, rhythmic, and devastatingly cold. Chae-woo dismantles the man, the shoulder, the ligaments, the pride, with a precision that borders on the mundane. There is no joy in the suffering, no thrill in the symphony of screams. It is merely the mechanical fulfillment of a contract, a task performed by a man who has forgotten how to feel anything but the ache of a missing half. In the midst of the bloodletting, Chae-woo's eyes drift. He looks toward a shadowed corner, at an old, scarred table. For a second, his grip slackens. He sees her there, a phantom, a memory, a woman curled in sleep in a room that is empty of everything but dust. She is the anchor he cannot find, the sanity he burned to keep. He casts the blood-slicked knife into the dirt. The nausea is rising, not from the gore, but from the realization that he is still breathing, still killing, still existing in a world where she is absent. He is a man who knows how to sever a tendon with expert ease, yet he cannot cut the tether that binds him to a woman who is no longer there. As the hunting dogs close in to finish the labor, Chae-woo turns his back on the mess he has made. He walks toward the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the silence, leaving behind a man who has lost everything and a hunter who has yet to find the one thing he needs to survive the night. He steps into the cold air above, but the shadow of the basement clings to his skin, a stain that no amount of light can ever truly wash away. The dawn arrives not as a promise, but as an intrusion, painting the room in a clinical, heartless light. Kwon Chae-woo stands before a skeletal, broken shelf, his hands trembling with a fine, rhythmic tremor that he attempts to quell with the harsh comfort of nicotine. The smoke curls around him, a grey shroud for a man who has successfully reclaimed his life, his duties, and his status, yet finds them all tasting of ash and rot. He is a master of hunting dogs and a silencer of secrets, yet he is haunted by a silence so profound it screams. His mind is a fractured landscape. Two distinct currents of memory churn within him, one defined by a cold, sharpened hatred for the woman who altered his orbit, and the other by a yearning so visceral it feels like a physical amputation. He exists in the space between these two truths, a man being eroded by the friction of his own soul. Then, there is the phantom. She appears when the shadows grow long, a delicate, sun-drenched apparition curled on the velvet sofa. He knows, with the cold clarity of a man who has consulted an underground doctor, that she is a ripple in his fractured mind. She is a hallucination born of trauma and insomniac delirium, a neurological side effect of a reality he cannot bear to inhabit. But he has chosen to cultivate this madness. He welcomes the insomnia, refusing the balm of sleep because sleep steals the ghost. In the waking dark, he can at least pretend the seat beside him is not empty. When his attendant, Jang Beam-hee, enters, the tension in the room is suffocating. Chae-woo is a statue of disciplined violence, his back a map of scars and muscle, practicing a penance of physical exertion. Beam-hee, ever the shadow, brings news of a woman waiting at the resort, a maneuver by his brother, an attempt to force a new shape onto Chae-woo's broken life. The suggestion that he might need a substitute, a warm body to replace the phantom, is met with a visceral, jagged rejection. Beam-hee's attempt to play the role of the fixer, to bring in a woman to quell the young master's restlessness, is a dangerous miscalculation. Chae-woo's retaliation is a sudden, sharp warning, a tap against the cheek that carries the weight of a death threat. He cannot be tethered to a random presence. His soul is already occupied by a ghost who would surely recoil at the touch of another. But the mention of her name by Beam-hee cuts through the room like a blade. Chae-woo freezes, the simple act of buttoning his vest suddenly an insurmountable labor. The air turns electric, heavy with the weight of an obsession that has moved beyond sanity. He is a man being hollowed out, a vessel for a love that has mutated into a poison. The question hangs in the air, unuttered but deafening. How long can a man sustain the weight of a ghost before he finally shatters under the pressure of his own devotion? Chae-woo turns toward the mirror, his reflection staring back, a stranger who carries the face of a lover, standing in a room filled with nothing but the lingering, agonizing scent of a woman who is not there. Kwon Chae-woo stands at the precipice of a manufactured life, staring at the empty sofa in his quarters. The ghost of her is gone, but the impression of her absence remains, a hollow weight in the architecture of his room. He tells himself he has severed the ties. He tells himself he has walked away without leaving a breadcrumb of hope. But the lie is a jagged piece of glass he keeps tucked under his tongue, drawing blood whenever he speaks. Perfume, once a luxury, now smells like an affront. He craves only the scent of wet earth, the fragrance of a garden he was forced to abandon. He moves through the day like a man underwater, arriving at a sprawling, emerald garden where the sun mocks his internal winter. Waiting for him is Bae Eun-ju, a woman wrapped in ivory silk and the brittle arrogance of her social standing. She is a social predator, a creature of rumors and calculated ambition, impatient at being stood up for 2 years by a man who might be her ticket to the Kwon fortune. She speaks, her words a rapid-fire volley of societal gossip, but Chae-woo does not hear her. He is focused on the empty chair beside him. It is not empty to him. When she moves to leave, insulted by his silence, he commands her to stay with a tone that drops the temperature of the garden. He toyed with her, confessing his time away in a way that was both horrific and darkly comedic. He spoke of being tied down, of his head being crushed, and of a life spent in a vegetative stasis of caretaking flowers. He was a man admitting to his madness, yet the truth sounded like a surreal, violent fairy tale. The woman's patience snaps when he turns his gaze to the empty space beside them. He describes a woman dozing in the sun, his eyes tracing contours that no one else can perceive. He speaks of a heart stomped into the dirt and a skull smashed in return, a mutual destruction that defined their ruin. She leaves in a flurry of confusion and fear, unable to comprehend the man who holds conversations with the wind. But then, the static in Chae-woo's brain shifts. He narrows his eyes, squinting against the harsh light. There, near the trees, a figure is moving. It is not the dozing phantom he is used to. This one is different. She is active, hurried, wearing a familiar straw hat, her form blurring as she navigates the foliage with purpose. He presses his palms against his eyes, desperate to clear the haze, but the image remains. It is not the stationary, peaceful hallucination he has cultivated to survive his nights. This one is busy. This one is alive. And as she moves, he feels the familiar, agonizing grip of reality begin to crack. Is this a new layer of his descent? Or is the architecture of his delusion finally collapsing to reveal something even more terrifying? He watches her, his pulse a frantic drum, terrified that if he blinks, she might vanish, and terrified that if he doesn't, he might finally lose the last fragile thread of his sanity. The garden is no longer a place of manicured aesthetics, but a battlefield of shifting perception. Kwon Chae-woo's pulse, once a steady, metronomic cadence of violence, now hammers against his ribs with the erratic force of a bird trapped in a cage. Before him, in the sun-drenched expanse, stands a figure, not the static, sleeping phantom of his insomnia, but a woman in a loose, utilitarian jumpsuit, her movements fluid and hauntingly deliberate. She touches the wooden pillars with a tenderness that feels like a violation of his current reality. He is a man watching a fever dream materialize. The grip of his hand on the armrest is white, the leather creaking under pressure born of pure, distilled disbelief. Is this the limit of his madness? Has his mind, so long a closed circuit of grief and malice, finally begun to leak into the physical world? He demands the truth from the void, calling his attendant with a voice sharpened by the premonition of collapse. The name he receives, Jiu-Bek, is a key that unlocks a cage he had long assumed was empty. The sudden, violent realization hits him with the force of a physical blow. The chair shrieks against the stone as he stands, his composure dissolving into a raw, unfiltered panic. His companion, the ivory-clad socialite, attempts to interject, her voice a shrill annoyance in his auditory periphery. She perceives his fixation, but she is blinded by her own ego, interpreting his erratic gaze as a slight against her presence. When he forces her to look, when he compels her to acknowledge the figure moving through the trees, her reaction is not the dismissal he expected. She sees her. She sees the woman in the straw hat. The knowledge that he is not alone in his delusion acts as a catalyst. Chae-woo doesn't walk, he breaches the distance between them, a man possessed by the singular, terrifying necessity of verifying a ghost. As he closes in, the sensory world becomes a violent intrusion. The air, usually stale with the metallic tang of his trade, is suddenly perfumed with the vibrant, living scent of her, an impossible, organic warmth that shatters his cold, clinical detachment. His mind, so carefully compartmentalized, is rendered utterly void. Then, the wind intervenes. A gust tears the hat from her head, a fleeting, chaotic motion that ends with the straw circle landing in his grip. As she turns, hair cascading like dark silk, eyes sparking with the sudden, sharp clarity of recognition, the world stops. Chae-woo stands paralyzed, his body trembling with a force that defies his training. The man who has spent years orchestrating the deaths of others finds himself unable to breathe in the presence of someone who is undeniably, inconveniently alive. The scowl that twists his features is not one of anger, but of a profound, agonizing betrayal by the universe. He clutches the hat as if it were the only thing preventing him from evaporating into the ether. The question that tears from his throat is a ragged, broken sound, a plea and a demand wrapped in the wreckage of his own unraveling reality. She is here. She is real. And for the first time in years, the monster doesn't know how to hunt. The garden, usually a sanctuary of silence, has become a suffocating chamber of static and misaligned realities. Kwon Chae-woo stands before her, his hands trembling with a force he can no longer govern. The woman before him is Lee-yeon, yet she is a mirror reflecting a stranger. The warmth that once radiated from her gaze has been replaced by a dry, sterile distance that cuts deeper than any blade he has ever wielded. He is a man unraveling. The air around him feels thick with the debris of a shared past that she no longer recognizes. He wants to reach out, to trace the line of her cheek, to demand she acknowledge the ghost of the husband she once knew, but his hands are heavy with the stains of a life she was never meant to witness. He speaks with a raw, jagged desperation, warning her of the peril of this house, this land fed on secrets and blood. He wants her to flee, to retreat to the safety of the island, to remain untainted by the shadow of the Kwon family. But she remains unmoved, a portrait of professional resolve. She is not the woman who once sought his protection. She is an arborist, a woman of soil and roots, here by the design of a man, Kisuk, who plays with people like chess pieces. The irony burns in his throat like acid. She introduces herself with a polite, detached formality, extending a hand that he feels an almost violent urge to crush. Her touch is a sensory invasion, a reminder of a life he is desperate to reclaim and terrified to touch. When she asks for her straw hat, a trivial item of no worth, he crumples it within his grip, a pathetic, impotent display of the turmoil warring within his chest. He watches as she snatches it back, her movements brisk and utterly devoid of the intimacy he craves. She is walking away, distancing herself from the man she once loved, turning him into a ghost in his own home. The urge to scream the truth, that he is Chae-woo, that he remembers the weight of their days, that the entire world is built on a foundation of his own fracturing mind, is a physical ache. Instead, he pursues her, a predator turned supplicant. He stops her, his fingers biting into her shoulder, desperate to force a flicker of recognition. Her reaction is not the soft yielding he remembers. It is a sharp, indignant rebuff. She challenges his authority with a boldness that leaves him stunned, calling him out for the brat he is in the eyes of her new, professional reality. She turns and leaves, retreating with a strange, frantic grace. Chae-woo stands frozen, the phantom sensation of a slap still stinging his cheek. The silence returns to the garden, but it is a hollow, mocking silence. He has found her, yes, but he has discovered that the woman he held in his memory is a phantom he cannot touch. And as she vanishes into the labyrinth of the estate, he realizes with a sickening clarity that he hasn't just lost his wife, he is losing the man he was supposed to be.